So we're talking about tissue regeneration, but before I move into that, because we're going to tell you a little story here, there's some things that really must be paid attention to as we are presently in this war front. Pay very, very close attention to the news, and for those of you who've invested in satellite TV or extensive cable, I recommend that you really shorten the time that you look at the sports or look at the movie channels and really monitor the world news, the CNN, Bloomberg very, very carefully. Also listen to the financial news so that you can really follow and hear what is really happening and how things are moving. This is a true transformation for ourselves, and my special support and friend, Brother Wanique, has made it very clear that the process is very, very simple. It is a willingness for us at this time to recognize that the war that is going on the planet is a reflection of our own personal inner wars. And so I do caution you not to look at the, quote, armed forces as a solution to the rise in terror, but recognize that our inappropriate language and communication to ourselves, the miscommunication and the misnaming of ourselves as we talk to ourselves and others is part of the personal terrorization that is being reflected in the outer world. And when each and every one of us is willing to resolve the fact that we each have been created in the likeness of God, that we have unlimited potential and we have unlimited capabilities, and support that in our communication to ourselves and our communications to every other God and goddess in the making, instantaneously this external conflict will resolve. So the more of us who are unwilling to face our own personal issues, illnesses, pathologies, etc., are truly contributing to the terror on this planet. So we have been given a wonderful mirror to look at and to make a decision about how we want to resolve the world issue, because it is a reflection of the issues that have confronted us. It is not insignificant at all that the terrorism appears to come from an area of the world where women are definitely repressed, where definitely women obviously have dwelled for centuries in low self-esteem and a total lack of understanding of who they are and what their real position is on this planet. And as we know, for the last 100 years in America, women have been struggling, not only here but in the Western world, to come to grips with and to establish a foundation that they can be comfortable with to define their literal place and function on the planet. So these women are, again, our mirrors as women, to let us know that in the face of still having the capacity to travel beyond the speed of light, to suspend space stations in space, to be able to monitor this planet with planes that are not manned, that only need to land once every month. This is the capability and the intellect that we have created. We are still having issues with accepting our gender and moving into clearly understanding and investigating who we are and how we have been created to demonstrate our divinity. So this is an ideal time, and I've just finished a schedule for myself of the sciences and the studies that I wanted to further investigate. And I really recommend for each and every one of you to recognize that the more information you know about yourself, the more potential for mastery of this planet you give yourself as a major key for domination over that which has been given to you. This planet has been given to us as a gift. And as we learn more about ourselves, it will intuitively be unfolded to you as to how to use the gifts, the resources, the materials on this planet for the betterment of self and humankind. Now, I think it's very interesting, and one of the things I want to share with you before I go into my lecture that I'm really excited about is, first of all, I got a call this afternoon before I came here, and I had a lady call me and tell me that she had just had her mammogram and ultrasound done, and she was told that they couldn't find any signs of the tumors that they were taking her to surgery for before she came to see me. Now, we put her on a simple cleansing program. We also asked her to look at her illusions, her illness, and we also asked her to redefine her path, which is the pathology that they found, because she was not on her divine purpose. And she was able to totally correct spontaneously, which is how we've all been created, a pathology that might have permanently disfigured her entire body. So Time magazine is now telling us here in February that there's new thinking on breast cancer, and that there's smarter drugs that are being offered. There are more gentle treatments, and also they're giving us the scoop on mammograms. I say to you, and I tell this to all of my clients, that it doesn't matter externally what you do. The key here is that the resolution and the mastery of the physical body is always going to be dependent on your state of consciousness and your internal communication. So we have been able to identify the chemistry, the physiological pathways that this interaction between mind and tissues occur, and we're going to talk about some of that today. Also, too, it's very interesting because, again, the gross national product has suffered tremendously because of the display of how the monies allocated to medicine and medicine research have gone into pockets and institutions that were totally unexpected. To the extent that now Time magazine is talking about the science of staying healthy, and there's an article here, how to keep the doctor away. Now, isn't that interesting? Okay. So I have not had the opportunity to read these articles, but I'm very curious about that one, because I do not sense at this point in time that it does not have its strings and attachments, okay, to give you one impression, okay, because to truly tell you that literally you are the doctor, okay, and that you can transform anything, I don't think that this economy is ready to share that truth with you yet. So it'll be interesting to see what their truths are. I'm going to go down. Okay, so I'm going to go down and begin to tell our story. So this lecture is to really begin to rectify an imbalance that's occurring, a very insidious one that most people are not aware of. We've been aware of the fact that people can now obtain organ transplants, that we can do tissue grafts, etc. But we are really not clear about the fact that there's a whole science now known as human corporeal reengineering that literally is ready to be marketed to the world. And it's important to understand that as long as you do not know how your tissues function and how you've been created, too many of us will actually be lured into feeling that we have to buy body parts or that we have to pay for someone to re-engineer our bodies. So the institution has acquired this information, whether you're aware of it or not, and that's the medical institution, through the use of your tissues, your blood specimens, your history. And let's just talk about that. And so this is a human issue, H-U-E-M-A-N. Can we just focus that for me? Okay. So does everybody know who this is? Okay, right, Einstein. And so Einstein is going to, as he has done when he was alive, shine light on this subject so that we can really understand what's going on. And I just really feel that he's standing here with me, supporting me in this because of what was actually even done to him. So we call this HCR, Human Corporeal Reengineering, and corporeal means body or togetherness, a core, okay, of oneness. So let's look at this little story about Albert Einstein. I was surprised when I got this information. As you know, he died of a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm on April 18th, 1995. His body was cremated and his ashes were scattered in an undisclosed location indicated in his will. He was a very private person, and he made it very clear that he did not want any physical shrines or memorials or statues made in his image. He gave the Hebrew University the rights to his image. Other than that, he asked to be cremated, and he donated his books and research to the University of Chicago and a few other places. He did not think that people had the right to private information about him. Einstein's family assumed that after his autopsy, that his entire body was cremated and submitted to them. Now, as you know, and that's interesting that we're talking about cremation here. I guess you've been in the news with your cremation policies, okay? But the truth was that Dr. Thomas Stoltz Harvey, the pathologist at Princeton Hospital who conducted Einstein's autopsy, removed his brain and kept it. Without Einstein's permission, Harvey took the brain, sliced it into 170 pieces, numbered each piece, documented it, kept folders on each piece. Each piece was prepared for microscopic, evaluation and reviewed. Now, since that time, Dr. Harvey has had total control over who has access to Einstein's brain tissue. 12 scientists were given slices by Dr. Harvey as gifts. Dr. Harvey had easy access to Einstein to obtain his permission because Einstein's medical history demonstrated that the Princeton laboratory repeatedly analyzed Einstein's blood and that Harvey himself went to Einstein's home at least once to collect his blood. Yet Harvey failed to get permission from Einstein to study his brain. So the question here, and this is a very important question, and before 9/11, if you were really paying attention, this question was on the table in Congress. Why and how does Dr. Harvey or any other pathologist have a moral or legal claim to dominion over a patient's tissue? And it's important to note that people such as Karen Ann Quinlan's brain, Hubert Humphrey's cancerous bladder, both of these were focuses of studies, and these were actually published in medical journals without their permission. Now, for the past 2 centuries, people's bodies and tissues have provided inquiring researchers with some useful, sometimes and useless information about those people's illnesses and behaviors. Often the target of research are chosen because of their membership in groups
or by races, such as the extensive research that was done on Native American Indians to elucidate the effects of alcohol, tuberculosis, and cirrhosis on human tissue. Africans and African American and Asians were intensely researched to elucidate racial differences and similarities, and also their tissues were used to develop bacteria. Now, if you're not aware of that, I did a lecture on biological warfare, and bacteria, and the gentleman I counseled with in doing that, Larry Strong, confirmed in his laboratory that they intentionally created a virus. They engineered the HIV virus to be able to only insert itself in lactobacillus that was motile. So they did something very interesting. They found out that in all races, the females of all races have the same type of lactobacillus except the African race. And the African woman, her lactobacillus is the only lactobacillus that is motile. So the HIV virus was engineered to insert itself in the mobile lactobacillus, and at the time of intercourse, when the walls of the vagina are microscopically broken, where the lactobacillus had access to the bloodstream, this virus then was spontaneously activated. So the engineers of this forgot about the different proclivities of sexual preferences, and so other races became infected because of sodomous activities, anal sex, etc. But this was definitely only created for transmission between the African female and her mate. We also know that the Ashkenazi Jews had been intensely studied to elucidate why their offspring died very early in neonatal life, and it was discovered that they had a particular deficiency, and now everyone is tested for PKU or phenylketonuria and also for Tay-Sachs disease. The brains of serial killers have been studied for over the last 70 years, which has been the foundation to develop the science known as forensic criminal pathology. Gay men's brains have been also analyzed. Dr. Simon, let me just pull this out, has written an entire book, Dr. LeVay, on the sexual brain, and he was able to identify something very interesting. And so many of you can contemplate that of all the brains that he was able to access in the hospital, of his hospital as a pathologist, as he analyzed them, he recognized that those individuals identified as homosexuals all had brains that were the exact mass and weight and configuration of a normal adult female. And that there is some reason why their brains, being exposed to testosterone, did not increase in size and increase in mass, which is indicative of a normal heterosexual male's brain. Now, none of those individuals, I'm sure, consented for him to do this research. Also, females of all races have definitely been studied. As a matter of fact, the birth control method used over the last 10 years, the Nor plants, were actually developed in Africa and used here in this country for indigent women to control the size of their families. Birth control pills, or the first set of birth control pills, were researched on women in India. And so it was very, very serious. Almost 1 million women died from that 25 years of research, as they were trying to elucidate how much hormone was safe or not. So these have been done, and these individuals have never been asked their permission to be involved in these studies. So the question here is, do you have legal authority over your tissues, tissue fluids and contents, blood, organs, or body parts once they are removed from your body or after your death? And at this point in time, because most people have never even thought about the fact that that was a problem, the answer is no if you go into most hospital systems. Now, when we talk about tissue reengineering, know that there's already a market available, and this whole series came out of Scientific America and the New Scientist in 2000, where growing new tissue is now going to be a new market introduced no later than 2003. And the researchers have taken the first steps toward creating semi-synthetic living organs that can be used as human replacement parts. Okay? So what they have found out, and this kind of is related to the stem cell issue. This is very interesting. So it says, brothers with heart. 4 brothers close since childhood are collaborating on the development of organs made from a patient's own tissues. Before long, custom-grown body parts may replace transplants, and they are doing that. Now, it's very interesting. When I did further research on these 4 brothers, their last name is Vacanti. These gentlemen and I graduated from the same medical school. So I thought that was real interesting that we came out of the same intellectual uterus, but we have definitely taken very, very different directions in supporting humankind in a healthy and long life. So it's very interesting what these brothers have demonstrated, and you need to know this because it alludes back to what Brother Wanique has talked about, and what I'm going to discuss in a little more detail, is the fact that they have found a substance that is inert, that is, it does not interact with human tissue, but is able to be shaped into any form or any anatomical part of the body. So they can actually take a scraping from the inside of a patient's mouth who may need a new nasal septum, a new ear, new bone replacement, a new trachea, valves in the heart, etc. Form that part of the body with this substance, put it in a petri dish, and actually then streak the cells from your mouth on it. In the proper temperatures, your cells will normally grow and take the shape of that template. They can then just lift off the cells and then immediately plant them into your body. It's really called an auto transplant or an auto plant. Now, what I think is so interesting, which no one is paying any attention to, is that in your body where you have managed to get your ear cut off, your nose destroyed, your valves in the heart are hardened and not functional, damage to fingers and bones, etc., that need to be replaced, that these same tissues will not spontaneously regenerate. But they can be taken off and out of your body, put into a foreign environment. A petri dish is quite foreign to the cells of your body. But even in that environment, grow normally to make the tissue that you have destroyed. Now, how does your cells go into an abnormal environment but yet and still function healthfully, far more healthily than what they are in your own body? And that's really the big question, and it really deals with states of consciousness. Now look at this. This is very important to recognize. In this magazine, they never exhibit any races, primarily all the models, etc., all the ads are Caucasian in this scientific magazine. But this was very interesting because in this one series on tissue regeneration and all of the research that's been done to be able to recreate the human body, all of the models, as you will note, all have African and melanated physiologies and physiognomies. So it says here, muscular again. Within a decade or two, scientists will be able to create a genetic vaccine that increases muscle mass without exercise. Okay? Now, how do you think that they were able to get the original template of very bulky muscles like this to be able to copy it and be able to put it in a vaccine? Okay? And it was very clear to me that with all the athletes that are definitely free territory for all kind of blood studies, biopsies, etc., that it was quite easy for them to have access to this, to identify the genes that create the stimulus and hormones that cause the proliferation of our muscle mass and be able to put that in a vaccine. So it says that genetic muscle building vaccines would be essentially undetectable in your body once they give them to you. So it says in separate experiments over the past couple of years at the University of Pennsylvania Medical Center in Philadelphia and at the Royal Free University Medical College in London, the researchers have been creating this muscle building vaccine based on engineered genes. So therefore, we know what is happening to the individuals, especially the African males that are going into the hospitals in Philadelphia. It's real clear. Okay. Yeah. Now, this is very interesting. What you see here is a bladder. They have now been able to create what's known as bio-artificial bladders. Okay? This is being done at Harvard Medical School. Okay? And it states here that because the bladders and the uterine tissue are not too much different other than thickness, they also are now able to make wombs to measure. So there are over 10 million women who have had hysterectomies, which obviously they've created a tremendous market. And now they are able to engineer and grow these organs again from the patient's own tissues here. Okay? So that means that they don't have the issues with rejection, etc. But now, again, if it really was that important or insignificant, that your uterus isn't important, you don't need it, you're not going to have any more children, whatever else, that we can just take it out, why would they take all of this money and research to now be able to engineer uteruses to sell back to you? Okay? Again, in that interesting advertisement. Okay. That looks like a fish burn, doesn't it? Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. It is theoretically possible to engineer organs such as livers, kidneys. Did you see what's up there? Breast. Isn't that interesting? Engineer breast and intestines. Now, you have to understand that they've already set it up for women to say that between the age of 35 to 65, 1 out of every 8 women in America can expect breast cancer. And the treatment that they have for you is mastectomy, along with radiation, chemotherapy, etc. But now they are able to genetically engineer breast. It's a big market. I've had women who've come to me who've had the abdominal flap rotation, etc. And one woman was just so upset because she described her breast as looking like little buttocks after they did her surgery her prosthetic surgery. She was very upset about that. So we know that artificial implantation and the flap rotations to make natural breast prostheses is not being successful, which is why this is being financed to begin to bioengineer breast. Now, we know that they have an unlimited amount of breast tissue that they've acquired to be able to do this. And I'm sure none of these women ever gave permission for their tissues to go to these universities to participate in the generation of producing bioengineered breast, uteruses, etc. Yes, head transplants are also on the table. Yeah. Equipping old minds with new bodies. Whether you call it head transplants or body transplants, it's not outside of science's realm here. And you have to understand how it works. It's interesting. They've already done these transplants on chimpanzees. They've been able to live through it. Some chimpanzees have been able to totally regenerate the upper part of their body. They have recovered full use of their arms, etc., but they have not been able to walk yet. But they have taken the head of one chimpanzee and put it on another. Okay, so now there were some studies I read where they allege that some people have already put their heads in cold storage. They were told that they had terminal diseases, and so they put their heads in cryo storage waiting for this technology to be finally developed. So the key is that now they're asking for organ transplants. Mark my word, they will be asking for total body organ donation. Or should I say they're asking for organ donations now. They will also be asking for total body donations. Now, this is a problem because they don't let this information come into the United States because there's such a big campaign for organ donation. But in other countries, I don't really like to use this term, third world countries, but in Asia, in India, there are families that sell other family members, their organ parts, kidneys, etc. That's very, very common to do that. People are kidnapped and their organs are removed for individuals who have the money that need this, etc. So it's really becoming a very, very interesting phenomena here about body parts. So I want you to really sit and digest this because your body is sacred and it also has a high value on it. So therefore, if you think that it's something that you don't want, there may be people already looking at you to basically and have already labeled parts of your body, then they will take it off your hands. This is very serious to look at, and most people are not aware of this. And especially when you go up into the hospitals, they are not seeing you as just somebody who's complaining about a sore throat or a headache or whatever. Okay, that's why before you can open your mouth, they've already got blood, urine, and everything else. Okay? Now, we know for a fact that we can now grow new nerve tissue. And it's very interesting because once they discovered that the only antidepressant that they were putting people on, known as Prozac, was the only antidepressant, and this was a big mistake on their part, that also stimulated new nerve tissue and the formation of a new brain, they had to then formulate a way to force people to stop taking it. Because see, you have to understand that if you're depressed and anxious, and then you're able to move out of that state of reality into a much more pleasurable, optimistic state, and you then reform your brain and grow new brain cells with that outlook, you permanently will hold that outlook. And you have to understand that a person who is optimistic, a person who is at comfort and peace with themselves, is very difficult to control, and is automatically a magnet to draw to them whatever it is that they desire. See, most people do not get what they desire because they spend so much time in agony, mentally worrying, negative thoughts and communication with self, that they have no magnetic field to draw this to them. So if you're happy and you have a thought, immediately it'll manifest. So this is very dangerous, and this is why they had to really give this drug a bad name. They don't even talk about Prozac anymore. They don't even want you to think about it. They got a bunch of other drugs that they want you to take because this was the only one that grows new brain tissue. Very interesting. So therefore, we know that we can now grow brain tissue. So there's no cells in the body, no organs that cannot be regenerated. None. Now, I do want you to know, and I do want you to understand very clearly that there is a lot of motivation for graduate students, medical students, and postdoctoral professionals to see you as revenue. These advertisements for research is present all of the time, where they are asking that you submit proposals where you can basically wind up getting sometimes they will give up to $5,000 to $10,000 per person that you're able to enter into the study to do this research. There's a lot of money here. And so unless you are looking at these professional magazines, you wouldn't see that they are actually wanting you to begin to do research on your patient population. So we know for a fact that for most of these studies that were done, the patients never consented to it, but the hospitals had already made agreements with other institutions such as universities and private research centers to send your blood specimens and tissue specimens to them for a price. And with that, they also included ages, names, diseases, etc., so that these organizations could better elucidate what was really going on with their tissues to develop this kind of technology. So the key here is, did you know that they were doing this? Does your doctor tell you that your tissues may be going somewhere else other than the hospital, other than the pathologist, etc., that you're going to be enrolled in a study because our hospital is affiliated with a research center that are doing a number of studies, etc., and let you know that you can get a copy or give us your opinion? No, you're never told. And this is a serious problem, and we'll see why. So again, this is a question that you have to ask yourself. Once they draw your blood, once a biopsy is done, once you give your urine, who owns that? Who owns that? Now, I thought this was very interesting when I saw this. Yeah. And see this? This was in your friendly Newsweek. Okay. And this is entitled The Gold Rush. And on his forehead is stamped Biopharmaceuticals Genetic Patent 2000 United States Industry. Okay, isn't that interesting? Okay, so this is the gold rush. Not only is his mind the gold rush, but also his DNA. Because see in the background here, you see the money signs? But see, this is something known as gel electrophoresis. And this is where we can take the protein from an individual, from the nucleus of their cells, and we can actually put it into this gel, and their DNA will actually line up itself. These are the genes. And that's why we can basically then take the genes from someone else, take your genes, and we can take those gels and lay them right next to each other. And if they're the same genetic makeup, the lines will be in the exact same place. So this was not just a decorative background back here. Those people who know, recognize that it's not only the mind, but it's also this individual's chromosomes and DNA that is the gold rush. Okay? Oh yeah, clearly. Okay. So someone up here said that he was melanin dominant and African. Real clear, right? Yeah. Now, do not doubt what you are seeing, because this is a series of 3 volumes that comes out every 4 years. I bought this first series in 1994, and it is a group of researchers from all over the world that present their research every 4 years on this one topic. And the topic is melanin. Scientifically, it's known as the melanotropic peptide. Tropic means to generate, to proliferate. So what is this proliferative capabilities of this peptide, or this protein here? So they looked at the source of it, where it came from, the synthesis of it, the chemistry, the secretion, the circulation, and the metabolism of this. Now, when you looked at all of the contributors to these 3 volumes of work, none of them came from any countries that were melanin dominant or from any melanin dominant institutions. So therefore, where did they get the melanin from to study? Because it didn't come from them, because they are melanin recessive. Now, it's very interesting. If you're not invited to these symposiums, or if you're not a member that contributes to the research, if you find out about this, then you have to pay. These 3 volumes cost me $650. So that was set up intentionally, because we know that most people are not going to pay $650 for 3 volumes of books, unless you really love yourself to find out what is known about you, which is why I bought these volumes. Now, this information is very interesting. This comes from the Journal of the National Medical Association. Now, this is very significant, because the National Medical Association is the black faction of the AMA. Now, they know, because they published this article, and they published this article in 1975, that there were lifelong differences in hemoglobin levels between blacks and whites. Now, Stanley M. Garn is from the University of Michigan. See that? The Center for Human Growth and Development, University of Michigan, and the Department of Pediatrics and Anthropology at Washington School of Medicine, etc. This study contained thousands and thousands of school children from 1968 to 1970. And it says here that we encountered a relatively large and systematic black-white difference in hemoglobin levels. So now it was real clear, and they use this and for evaluation of preschool nutrition, etc. And they concluded, and they knew, that if you took the values for Caucasian and use them as the standard for Africans, that the Africans were definitely not going to get the nutritional or the correct diagnosis for the condition of their blood. Now, now you have to understand, this information stayed exactly where it is right now on this piece of paper. This gentleman from the university, now you have to understand this. Now this is interesting, because Stanley Garn sent me almost 400 pages of data on the racial studies that University of Michigan has done on all races. It is the think tank for storing this information. Now you have to understand that Stanley Garn submitted this to the Black Medical Association. He told the black doctors that your blood is not the same as Caucasians, and you have to look at their blood differently, or you're going to mistreat your people. There are no black doctors that I know of, except for the ones that have written me, that see your blood this way, because they were taught in medical school to only use the standard that is used in the Western world, which are Caucasian measurements, and everybody is actually diagnosed based on Caucasian standards. So it's a known fact, for example, that if an African woman presents with a hemoglobin of 10.5, that is normal for her. That is not an anemia. Our standard is 10.5 to 12. Caucasian standards are 12 to 14. But you will be given iron pills in any institution you go into here if you present with a hemoglobin of 10 or 10.5. Because by the Caucasian standard, that is abnormal, and then you are told you have a problem, and giving you iron pills sets you into a whole different illusion and does precipitate illness. But the information is known, and you have to understand that Stanley Garn, when I wrote him, never ever charged me 1 penny for all the research he gave me, because obviously he was definitely trying to save his soul for what he knew the situation was. But this has been completely repressed. It has never been taught in any of the continuing medical education classes throughout any of the medical schools, etc. But it is all known. And he intentionally submitted this to the Black Medical Association, and they printed it as a novelty, but they never actualized it. Now, please understand that research on all races, but definitely because I'm talking about my race family at the moment, is a real reality. And everything that could be thought of to research has been done on us. It says here, Caucasian genes in American Negroes. They have done research and have been observing the effect of miscegenation. How does an African who is miscegenated behave versus one who basically is 100% pure genetic African from Africa? They know the difference. And it's very interesting here because it said it was very difficult to describe the genetic history of a large defined human population in a meaningful way. But they go on and talk about how they did this. They identified the gene here that they were using, the McDuffie allele, which occurs in Caucasians. It never appears in Africans unless that African bloodline has been miscegenated. So they took all of the blood that they could get their hands on, and I think about the sickle cell centers that were being used for far more than just determining sickle cell, to determine how many of us, as we went to these centers, had the McDuffie allele in our bloodstream. Because they went to Africa, and from the data, and this article was so interesting, because from the data that was saved in Savannah, Georgia, Virginia, and one other location where all the slaves were being brought in, they kept the records from where they were coming from in Africa, and they went back to Ghana, Senegal, Nigeria, and drew their bloods to make sure they had the standard of their DNA, so that when they compared ours, they would see the difference and the degree of miscegenation. So all of this is being done. I don't know if Wanique remembers that, but, you know, again, I was asked to go to Grady Hospital to speak to the hepatitis C support group. And to really show you how God works here, we got to talking, and they were very excited about what I told them, because normally they go there to just kind of console each other until they die. And we talked about the fact that hepatitis C can be treated like hepatitis A and B, but you need to do something different. So it got lengthy. So anyway, by the time we finished, I wanted to go to the bathroom, and everything in the reception building, or the Secretary Administrative Building, that's what it was, had closed. So therefore the lavatories were closed, etc., the area, the library. And so one of the individuals there who knew the building said, well, you can go downstairs to the bathroom. So I'm like, okay, fine. So they gave us the directions, so Wanique was assisting me. So we're going down the stairs, and it turns totally into a different world. We leave a floor that is totally lined with marble walls, Byzantine ceilings, etc., and we are now on a stairwell that has mops, buckets, pails, all down the side of it, etc. I couldn't believe it was in the same building. So I said, we are definitely in the wrong place. I don't even know who comes in this part of the building because it hasn't even been kept. And so Juanique said, no, I know it's down here somewhere. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to follow him. So as we finally got down to the next landing, because it was very strange because it was even like a double stairwell. So it's going very, very deep down into the basement of this building. In looking for the bathroom, which we found was definitely not a bathroom that was used often, we also stumbled into a high security research laboratory. And over the double doors with the card padlocks, etc., hung the African American prostate DNA Research Center. The African American Testosterone and Prostate DNA Research Project. Now, see, you have to understand how profound that was, because this was the administrative building where the library is and the dean's office and whatever else. And we were not even supposed to even be down here because they got mops and buckets on the floors, etc. It was a double stairwell because we kept going down and down. There was no floor until we got way down underneath this building. And this had double keypads and had to have cards and know the combination and everything to get in here. And I said, well, no wonder. I said, any man that rolls up in Grady, if you talk about any problem below your navel, your prostate is going to be in this lab. Because they're getting paid for it. They had all the graphs on the walls because our nose was flat. We were looking so hard through the little windows. They had all the graphs on the walls. They had all the studies numbered. It was a huge research lab. So they were using the prostate to elucidate the DNA or the gene that produces the level of testosterone in African men. Now, whether you know it or not, the African male out of all males on the planet has the highest level of testosterone. That's why you have the muscle mass, the bone structure, and everything. And if you traveled around the world, you can look at your physiology, your physique, and see that it's much denser, far more muscle mass, far firmer, less aging, etc., than any other race of people. So the key here is that they are recognizing this, and many of these studies where they talk about being able to have instant muscles from vaccine, this is how they're getting all this information. So I was just really surprised about the fact that this was a covert prostate study being done on African American men on the elucidating level of their testosterone and using it through their prostate. So at that time it was interesting because the papers were correlating the high incidence of prostate cancer in Atlanta. And so I even questioned if that was even true. Okay, because they had to get so many specimens, etc., to do this research. Okay? So as we are now talking about genes and research, it's like I said, this is a human problem. So they are researching on all humans. Okay? And here's a little Asian baby, and what they have is the little Asian baby sitting in its genome. So when they print the genome out, this is how it looks. And each one of these letters represents what we call a nucleotide base that forms the DNA, the genes, and the chromosomes of that individual. And the order of them is quite important and specific. So it's interesting because there was a movie that talked about this. And the name of it is Gattaca. And Gattaca was derived from these letters of a nucleotide base. So guanine, adenine, thymine, cytosine, this is what these letters represent. But if you also look at this, they're also telling you that they have not only been looking at genes for physical characteristics, but also for states of emotion. They're looking for the genes of emotion. Look at that. Greed, happiness, inquisitiveness, aggressiveness, impulsiveness, anxiety, IQ. These are the things that they are also evaluating, because they know for a fact that every emotion you have, if it is a chronic emotion, is encoded on your DNA. Because emotions, as all thoughts, are also chemistry in the body. That's why you feel the way you do, because the brain creates the corresponding chemical from your thoughts to tell your cells what to do. So if you haven't forgotten, this is actually how the little cuties look. And it's interesting, in all races, the chromosomes are black. Okay, because every race has been given the ultimate protection from external exposure to radiation, laser, etc. And the substance that covers all genes and chromosomes is melanin. Okay? So all chromosomes are black because they basically are covered with melanin, because melanin absorbs light. It neutralizes the effects of ultraviolet light, cosmic rays, X-rays that might actually cause the DNA to take on an abnormal configuration, which means that it will actually cause a mutation or a defect in its message to the cells. Now, since the blood is being drawn by the hospitals, the blood is taking tissues from surgery and biopsies, it's very interesting because even those groups and organizations that are religious but who value knowing their history biologically have also been exploited. Over 100 competing geneticists set up shop in Utah using the Mormons' blood samples as a starting sample for genetic studies. So now, if you know anything about Salt Lake City, this is the one place in the country that is not in a medical database where you can go and begin to trace your family lineage. And they actually offer this free. So with all of this information, names, dates, races, diseases that the family member died of, etc., they could basically really do a complete analysis of genetic makeup and disease. So a gentleman by the name of Mark Skolnick was one of the first to arrive in Salt Lake City, Utah in 1974. One decade later, his pioneering efforts paid off. He used the blood samples from Mormon families and identified a gene that can cause inherited breast cancer. Okay? Now, look what he did. Who owns your genes and genetic information? Mark Skolnick discovered what is now called the breast cancer gene. He founded a company known as Myriad Genetics and patented the gene. Now he took these people's blood and just claimed it and patented the gene and made it his. His patent created the following circumstances: that no one can perform genetic testing for a mutation in the breast cancer gene without his company's permission, that his company can charge what it chooses to doctors or scientists to test for the breast cancer gene, that no one can develop or employ a gene therapy for breast cancer without his company's permission, and that Myriad has indicated it will use its control to forbid prenatal testing for breast cancer due to the controversial potentials for abortion. Okay? So here we have, again, remember the concept here, the gold rush. And so first come, first serve. So the gold now is no longer in California in the hills. It is now basically your body. Okay? And they are rushing to be able to determine what's unique about it, and these companies are actually patenting this and are not informing you that they found anything. There was a case recently where this gentleman had a very strange disease, and they found a unique attribute in his spleen. And they found that the substance in his spleen was able to treat a very common illness in other people. So they actually took the gene of his from his spleen biopsy, because they took his spleen out, and they patented it and actually started making the vaccine. And he found out about it and sued them. But they didn't tell him anything about it, etc. They just said, oh, good, we found this out, and they just went forward. So again, it is very clear that now they are able to also identify behavior traits by looking at your genetic genome. And if you saw the movie Gattaca, it's very, very interesting, and I recommend each one of you do this. It says a lot about parenting. It says a lot about how we perceive ourselves, that is our ID, because your identity determines your destiny. And this individual, for him to be able to actualize his destiny, even though he was what they call a love child, because he was conceived in a normal manner, as opposed to his brother who was genetically selected. And at the time of birth, when they immediately at birth, and that this movie is projected into the future, where everyone is born and immediately after birth, your genetic genome is printed out. And they can tell you at the time of birth what type of disease you'll have, when you'll have it, and how long you'll probably live. And based on that information, you are then immediately put in your proper class in society. So anyone who had any significant diseases or propensities were marked as a, quote, invalid. And these individuals could only clean in society. So he was a very brilliant man. He loved astronomy. He loved mathematics. And his parents disencouraged him in studying, because they said, you know your condition, and you know that you can never go to NASA, you know that you can't go to school, etc. So why frustrate yourself? And they would do this to him continuously. So therefore, he just quietly decided that he could no longer take that type of support, and left his family and began to ingeniously devise a way for him to enroll in NASA. He was successful in doing that, and even in the face of his body weaknesses, was able to actualize his purpose and his vision. And it was interesting, because where he thought he perhaps had fallen short, there was always someone that was placed there to actually take him to the next level, and that is actually how the universe works. It's important to understand that the universe rearranges itself to create your reality. The universe will always rearrange itself to create your reality. And that is something you should definitely remember. So when you move into negative self-talk, negative doubt, well, the universe will rearrange itself to create your reality. Because that is not our destiny, but if you accept that as your identity, then the universe has to give you that. Okay? So, we know that behavior, emotions, physical traits are all encoded in your genes. And it's very interesting, because after all this money was spent on elucidating the human genome, the government stated that patients who are paying $3 billion of the cost of discovering the genome through the taxpayers' money, and also the money funded by Congress, most of these individuals will most likely not be able to experience its benefits. Okay? And so this is very, very significant here, because there are advertisements that really say that. There's a computer company that does an ad, and they are constantly talking about, is it the D generation? It's the D, they talk about the D generation. And the D generation right now is approximately somewhere between 2 and 8 years old. But they're advertising right now, and they keep talking about all these different things, and they said, you know, this is for the D generation. It's not even for us. But they want you to invest your money, because it's a for your awareness that they're on the stock market. So they want you to invest your money in the stock market, that kind of thing. But they're already projecting that what they are creating electronically, that you're not even going to be around for it. Okay. Now, this is very interesting, and you know, this is a picture of a very benevolent and supportive birth, because normally in the hospital there are so many lights on the little baby when he comes out. It's incredible. His little nervous system is shocked, but in this case they had lowered the lights. So this baby is being born, but the highlight here of what's being discussed is the clamping of this cord. You know, no one thought that umbilical cords would actually be such a important commodity at this point in time. So this is an interesting collage that was used in an advertisement, because as you can see, it talks about artificial insemination, where we have a multiplying embryo dividing, the sperm is added to the petri dish to create this individual. This is stem cells here and the forming brain of a newborn. So it's very interesting, because this is what high technology is now able to do at a drop of a hat. So Newsweek talked about the embryo research versus pro-life politics. And before 9/11, this was the big to-do in the news, etc. And these little cells known as stem cells. Now the truth of the matter is, and I've been talking about this for about the last 12 years, is that the true stem cell is the red blood cell. All tissues, stem cell, liver, lung, brain, etc., originate from the red blood cell. And we have the capacity to continuously make red blood cells directly from the food we eat in the base of the little cells known as villi in our small intestines. Now, this was proven in 1975 by a group of research scientists in Japan, and they wrote 10 volumes of work on this. And still to this day, after that work was verified, it took them another 7 years to verify that the 10 years of research was accurate by another group, they still will not introduce this information into Western medicine. Why? Because if you understand that the food that you eat is directly transformed into red blood cells, this society could not justify the food stuffs that they put on the market and sell to you as food, because it automatically is very clear that you will be making very weak, very perishable red blood cells that in no way can be transformed into tissues, because their lifespan would be so short because of their abnormal constitution and configuration. So these cells, stem cells, are another type of collection of data that hold the entire library of who you are, that do reside in different points in the body. You have spleen cells around the heart, you have a set of spleen cells in the brain, you have a set of stem cells around the heart, stem cells in the brain, and stem cells also in the abdomen. And these cells, with the proper state of consciousness, can also be activated and directed to transform themselves, or what we call differentiate, into any tissue that you can hold the vision of. Okay? You have to understand that regenerating yourself requires the same methodology as anything else you're creating. If you make a cake, you have to be able to hold the vision of that cake, pay attention to how you add the ingredients, be consistent, be timely, etc., to manifest that. It's the same thing with your body. So being able to hold the focus for the tissues or the organ that you want to regenerate, and making sure that the environment and the nutrients are on board, will cause you to regenerate tissue. And so you have to remember that creatures that have a brain less than the size of a thimble, snakes, lizards, the gecko especially, they regenerate their whole body. But you have to understand that the first law is that they never doubt that they can do that. See, that's the first law. So Therefore, what is the value of this clump of cells? Another human or a new hope for the diseased and the dying. Okay? So again, this is an external commodity that you make at birth and you continue to sustain in your body, that a group of scientists have decided that if they can get a hold of this with unlimited capacity, that they can sell this back to you. See, my lecture today is to inform you that there's nothing that they are offering on the market to you that you can't do spontaneously within yourself. This is known that you can do this, but this information is not given to you because you're being prepped for a new market. And so it goes into the same race again: who has the money, who has the clout, and who has the access. So they're steering you into another divide just based on the existence of having a body. So this is not how things were created. That totally nullifies, and so you have to understand this is very subliminal, because with the capacity for them to sell you that illusion, you now are then really going to start perceiving them as your God. Okay? And you're going to totally abandon that your God has given you. And this is happening right now. So this is very interesting. So he says here that if we harvest adult tissue instead of embryonic stem cells, says Senator Sam Brownback, we won't have to kill anybody. Now, isn't that interesting? Now, that's what they put in the magazine. I think this was U.S. News. So you have to look at that statement, because they're saying that we're going to get this tissue. That is clear. So either you give us access to be able to have these embryos and stem cells and umbilical cords, or guess what? Because we know that human beings have clusters of stem cells within them, we are going to then have to go after you, because we're going to have it. Now there's a whole plan that I haven't discussed here about what's necessary for the space journeys that have already been piloted, because they have to have tissue, they got to have organs when they go to outer space. See, they are already being taught how to be able to do the transplant surgery, the robots are in place, etc. The surgeons are prompted here, because all that is all hooked up. So if the organs are there, they can diagnose the problem. They can do that on the space station. So they've got to have organs in storage, because if they're somewhere between here and a place that takes 2 or 3 star years to get to, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? So they have all of these storage banks that have to be filled. Okay, now this may seem like it's far-fetched and sci-fi, but that's only if you are not following the high sciences, because it's all right there. So, I mean, I had the opportunity to go to Fort Detrick's. What's the day? Sunday. Yesterday. Okay. And that is a real eerie place. So it's interesting. One of the gentlemen that was escorting me there was saying that it is really disgusting when they burn the monkeys' bodies, because after they have all these mutations and whatever else, they have to burn their carcasses. They cremate the animals that they do research on. Okay, so they have like real high society, real high security now since 9/11. Okay, but I mean, it's just very eerie feeling just to even go there, to Fort Detrick. So I'll let you all do the research to find out about the place. It's interesting. Go to the internet. DETRICKS. Yeah. In Maryland. So now let's be very clear here about the anatomy of feelings. Remember, wherever there is thought, there is chemistry. And this is why you have to stop playing games. So you think that because you didn't tell somebody that you hated them, or you know, you really don't like your job, but because you go there every day on time and you stay till 5 o'clock, that nobody really knows the difference. Well, as your tissues melt every day, and you get older and older and bald-headed and whatever else, etc., and finally fall out on the job, it's real clear that you didn't want to be there. Because when you are excited and enthusiastic and recognize that this is an honor to be able to do this job, you get younger and younger, more efficient, etc., and everybody recognizes that. The job doesn't kill you, you master the job. So therefore, a thought is a frequency of light, and all thoughts have always existed. Now you have to understand that there is nothing new under the sun. We are enveloped in a whole field of thought and history about this planet in the form of thoughts known as the psi bank. And when a person can actually clear their mind and ask the question that they want to have information on, the psi bank will send you the information. Now, it's left up to you if you don't believe the information that you get. And I have witnessed this for years personally myself, because a lot of the information that I've received has come from the psi bank. I did not have any physical documentation about what I was talking about, but I knew that it was true. So therefore, I asked my God to please give me a little more stability and send me some documentation in writing, because these people are alleging that I am a fanatic and crazy and a lot of other things. And with that, then people like Stanley Garn and all these other individuals start sending me the information that they had recorded and locked away. So you have to understand what I'm telling you here, because there's nothing that you cannot know. Everything that has ever been thought and done in this realm is recorded and is in storage in the psi bank, and you can access it. This is why the promotion of drugs is so dangerous, because it throws the brain into such a warped functioning that you can never access these subtle and higher frequencies. And if you do access them, such as with the use of LSD, it is so fragmented and so distorted that you cannot put it in its proper perspective and translate it appropriately to this dimension, because you have to understand that the psi bank is not of this dimension. You fly through the psi bank every time you go up in the sky. So it's not of this dimension. It is a frequency, however, of knowledge that you can access. So, thoughts are frequencies of light. They have always existed. And the mind, it is an energy field that totally encompasses the entire body. Its orientation and memory allows one to perceive and realize certain thoughts. And you inherit part of your mind body. The brain is your master chemistry lab, and the brain translates all thoughts and reduces their vibratory rate so that they become physical. The physical manifestation of a thought is known as a neurotransmitter. It's a chemical that is then released into the bloodstream and through every nerve in your body, so that every cell knows what you are thinking. Now, your body will then give you the response to that thought by the sensations that you have. So when you are thinking thoughts that are toxic to the cells, that chemistry then causes the cells to react in such a way that provokes and gives you the feedback sensation of pain and discomfort. So again, as it's already been stated earlier, instead of us asking ourselves and doing an evaluation of how we're thinking, we immediately go to the drugstore and get Excedrin and aspirin and everything else to then numb the nerves so that they cannot respond to the chemistry that is in your bloodstream. Now, none of that erases the chemistry, obviously, because the chemistry is continuously being made from your thoughts, your states of consciousness. Now, if you are following what I'm saying to you, then every disease that is chronic, high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, coronary arteries disease, Alzheimer's, is due to a chronic state of consciousness. So irregardless of what is being done for you on a physical level, until someone helps you to realign your thoughts so that the chemistry shifts in the bloodstream, because your cells will respond and let you know if you've made the shift, because guess what happens? You will have spontaneous healing. The pain will immediately go away. The tissues will correct themselves, etc. So the dark side, or should I say no, the void, excuse the expression, of what is happening in the medical profession is that none of these diseases are accompanied with a process to take the individual through to realign their thinking and their perception of self. And this is how they wind up killing themselves from the medication, because they are taking medication for 40 and 50 years. It cannot be done. I had a patient that came to me who was 68 years old and had been taking high blood pressure medication since he was 28. And there was no question in my mind that all the symptoms that he had were primarily due to the toxicity from taking medication so long. And of course, it is going to take a while to reorientate his thinking, if he will even recognize that his thoughts are the issue, because he has forgotten that he was thinking in a way that was destructive. It's now become habitual and addictive. So, since we know now that our body can never be fooled, because every thought that we are conscious of, the chemistry is already in our bloodstream. This is one of my old transparencies. Your genes can be turned on and off. And the primary flick of the switch is done by your thoughts. You can be put in environments that, if the switch is off, will make sure the switch stays off. But even in that environment, the gift that you've been given by your God, free will, can even switch the switch on in an adverse environment. And we know that we've had individuals who have had really interesting relationships with their parents, if they had parents, etc., and they had to teach themselves how to read and write. I sat with a politician not long ago who told me that, he missed school for the first 8 years of his life after 5 years old. But once he was able to put himself in a position, he was able to catch up, finish elementary school, high school, and college in a matter of 10 years. So therefore, you can activate your genes in any environment with the use of free will and determination. And it is important to understand that, because this is great, because if you know that there are proclivities in your family of heart disease, senility, schizophrenia, well, you don't want to activate those genes and those potentials. So if you understand the belief systems and the thought patterns that those individuals had, and you do not relive those, you will keep that gene shut down. And even in genetic counseling, they don't even tell parents this when they say that there's a genetic problem, that the gene can be changed. It does not have to be expressed, and if it is expressed, it can be changed by environment. So just remember this pyramid. Oh, 5 minutes, right? Okay. Just remember this pyramid, and then we're going to take a break here. The triangle of the mind, okay? You inherit your genes, but which genes are expressed and which genes are not depends on you, because you expose yourself to education and experiences, and you determine your home environment. So the home environment will activate or keep your genes shut down, and the experiences that you have in life and your level of education, and education by my definition means your willingness to just learn. Doesn't mean you have to go to any formal institution, but that you've made a commitment in your life to take time every day to expand your data bank, will totally change the genetic ability exhibited in your body versus other family members. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then I'm going to come back and summarize this, and then we can go into our Q&A. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Dr. Pookrum a round of applause. We're going to take an intermission. A few announcements during the intermission. We're going to have a $2 raffle. The sisters are going to come forward to announce what it is we're going to be raffling. We have food in the back, all vegan and vegetarian. To my right here, we have books on sale, and we have Dr. Pookrum's book.
Okay. So let's just focus. I'm just about finished. But I really want you to focus on this pyramid. This is known geometrically as a tetrahedron. And a tetrahedron really is the first building block in this dimension that renews itself. Now, I just finished writing a book known as Medical Feng Shui. And it's a 3-volume work. And as I've been studying Feng Shui, and this really works, I was not happy, though, with the explanations as to why it worked. And some of the practices seemed to be superstitious and a lot of other things. And I was like, this is like just too rigid and too fixed and too many different schools, and I just really want to know what the truth is. So in my research, and you can get more details in the book, what I discovered is that our order of construction and how God has constructed this universe, it is self-perpetuating, and we know that. So we were also created to be self-perpetuating. And the shape and the form of the environments that we put ourselves into are crucial and critical for that regeneration, or what we call recursion, to occur. The tetrahedron is the primary structure that when light goes into any structure in this shape, that the light bends at such an angle, and the angle is 76.2 degrees, that when the light hits itself, it doesn't create chaos, but it actually multiplies itself and renews. And that process is called recursion. So this is why any structure that is built with this as one of the geometric templates, or anything put in it, never decays. So that's why from 5,000 years ago, when they went into the Great Pyramid of Cheops, they found bushels of wheat, and they were able to take the wheat and plant it, and it grew just like it was fresh wheat from the last harvest. Because geometry literally is the study, or it is the study of understanding the graph, or the geography, literally, of Earth in this dimension. That's what geography or geometry is. It's the angulation and the relationship that Earth forms with itself. It also is the angulation and the relationship that we form with ourselves and everything else in the universe. So therefore, when you understand then that if you can maintain control just over 2 parameters of this tetrahedron, what you expose yourself to and what is in your home environment, you can have self-mastery over anything that you may have inherited in your genetic makeup. And it's just that simple. And you have to understand the gift of this is that if you can maintain a home environment and your experiences of a constant level, that whatever you've inherited that is inferior, that you do not want, this awareness will actually, over time, and it's known that it happens in 7 generations, will actually destroy that genetic weakness or dysfunction. So you want to breed out something of the family, addictive behavior patterns, diseases, etc., by living the lifestyle and also giving yourself the experience necessary to repress that particular genetic information over 7 generations. If that becomes a cultural way of being this, that the children follow, their children follow, etc., in 7 generations, that gene will no longer be in your bloodline. And we have control over that. It's not something that someone has to cut out of our DNA, which is what is going to be sold to you. That's also in the story of Gattaca, that you can actually inbreed in and inbreed out traits in your own genetic makeup. Okay? So, it's important that whenever we share information, we always want to also give a solution. And as we've been talking about solutions, one of the most important is water. And I'm very concerned because we have, as a race of people, taken such a passive attitude about the misuse of the waterways on this planet. And for that, we will suffer if we do not get aggressive and get control over what is put in our water and how it is treated. Because water is what is necessary to be able to sustain proper brain function, nerve function, and guess what? It actually washes away those neurotransmitters or the chemistry made from your thoughts so that they don't continuously reside in the body. So it's very interesting because I recognize that people who become obsessed, who go into depression, the first thing they do is they diminish the amount of fluid that they take in. And then they lock the body into the chemistry that keeps them in that predicament of consciousness. And then in the hospitals, they really don't care. And they even give you drugs on top of it, which is why the person never responds, because the chemistry is never washed away. So it says right here, an instant brain boost. Drinking lots of water does what? Heightens the energy, improves concentration, mental and physical coordination, and academic skills. So I seldom see young individuals drinking water. They have everything up to their mouth but water. Juice, pop, all kind of things. I mean, some of the stuff is scary, the colors that it is. I don't have any idea what it is. But I know anything that's, turquoise and aqua blue, I don't want to drink it. I know it didn't come from nature, but I see all kind of things, in the children's mouths. But I never see young children walking around with bottles of water. Never. That's why they're hyperactive in school, problems with discipline, loss of concentration. So of course it's boring because they really can't even really understand what's being said to them because they are not drinking water that basically does these things. It instantly boosts the brain. So it says here that if you have no medical limitations, it's recommended that you drink 10 ounces of water for every 30 pounds of your total body weight. Now, obviously, if you have glaucoma or kidney problems, etc., or colon problems, that has to vary. But it says, therefore, the average person who weighs 150 pounds needs 5 10-ounce glasses of water a day. So this is very, very important. This is the first thing that if we want to get on top of the thoughts that we're having, we want to be able to change our orientation. Deep breathing and drinking clean water is very important. One of the things that was very common as I made recommendations to my patients in our community is our unwillingness to want to pay for water. Well, I'm not going to pay for water. We don't want to do that. We don't want to pay for water. We don't want to get a water filter, etc. And it's very difficult to help you when you won't basically help yourself clean up your body because you've got to have clean water. Every news station in every major city in this country has already announced that the tap water is toxic and they do not, as a city, take responsibility for the results. Every news station has made that announcement. And so if you still want to basically drink it, you can, but the consequences are quite high. So water is very important for the nervous system. It's very important for the body. And with a healthy nervous system and a clean body, you can regenerate any tissues. And what it does, it helps to wash away what I call the ants, the automatic negative thoughts. So many people's brains are full of little ants, automatic negative thinking. Yeah, okay. So the next thing you want to do is remember the 3 R's. That you want to get rid of the stressor. You want to then go into creating a plan, not to recreate the stress, and then you want to then re-educate your body and brain as to how you're going to choose to handle the experience differently the next time. And what happens with most people is that, yes, they perform the first R, so they get rid of the stressor or leave the circumstance, but they definitely then do not go within to figure out what they need to do so that that doesn't happen again, and then to re-educate their brain-body response so that if it still happens again, they are going to choose a different way to respond, because that is chemistry. So if you were really upset and howling and screaming about a circumstance and you recognize how bad you felt, then the thing that you need to spend time with is that you have to get clear about how you choose to respond to that again if you haven't figured out how you created it, so that you don't introduce those toxins into your body again. So in closing, okay, there's a new gold rush, the new frontier. And the new frontier is now genes and tissues. And this company, basically, you can invest in their genetic genome research. They're on Wall Street now. So it's important for you to make some decisions here. I recommend all my patients that when they go to the hospitals or to their doctors, that they ask their doctors, what happens to my blood or my pap smear, etc., when it leaves your office? And if they don't know, then you ask them, can they then write on the chart or on your records that we discussed this, and that you are agreeing and assuring me that none of my specimens will go into any research projects without my permission, because I'm not giving consent to that. And that'll be interesting to watch his or her response. Because you have to understand that most of my colleagues don't even recognize what is happening. They are just a conduit and a vehicle to just shuttle tissue and blood from you to these conduits. They don't even recognize what's happening. So just by having that discussion with them will wake them up that something else is going on that they weren't aware of. And for your information, I am supporting them that they will be humble enough and accommodative enough that they will investigate to find out what is really happening if they feel that they can't assure you that your specimens are private and protected, if they won't enter into that agreement on the chart. That is the first thing. Secondly, I think it's very important that you remember what's being said. Bush has said continuously that this war is going to be very unique because it's going to have the highest number of civilian fatalities, far more than military fatalities in any war we've ever had. And every time he makes that statement, there's no one in the audience that ever confronts him and asks him, well, why is there going to be more civilian fatalities? What do you know that we don't? No one has ever asked him that, but he continuously keeps saying this to you. And so now, right off the top, with the number of individuals who are chronically ill, high blood pressure, diabetes, epilepsy, scleroderma, it goes on and on and on. If there is another 911 and the hospitals are shut down and the pharmacies are not available, what is going to happen to all these people who are drug dependent? For their pressure, for their diabetes, for their anti-seizure medication, etc. Oh, those are going to be the first ones out. So I recommend seriously that if you are on medication for any chronic reason, that this hiatus in this war front be your stage to immediately get to the bottom of your issues emotionally and mentally, so that you can get off medication and regenerate your tissues, so that you will not be held hostage when the system is not able to support you to get medication to you. And it is not wise for you to basically think that how it is today is going to continue to be. It is not. And they keep warning you about this. And you have to understand, I just wrote an article in our newsletter entitled A is for Attitude. And it is very clear that whoever wins the war won the war before the first confrontation and exchange of bullets occurred. And so that means that if you do not have a winning attitude and have already projected into your future who and what and how you are going to get through this war, then you have already set yourself up as a fatality. You must project what it is that you want to experience on the other side of this event. That's very important. There's no athlete that goes into any sports event that does not already have seen themselves winning. You have to project your end result, because if you don't, everybody else that's thinking for you, their result becomes your result. And if you have someone telling you that they see you as a fatality, that's significant for you if you haven't already decided your own destiny. So you have to understand there's many scenarios, because they keep telling you that. We got theaters. So we just finished theater 1, we're moving into theater 2. So I'm like, oh, this is real interesting. They got all kind of events and experiences planned for you. Because if you haven't planned your own life, well, then they've planned it for you. Oh, this is how this works. And so therefore, what plans do you have? I was clear many, many years ago that I was not going to be somewhere having to figure whose arms and fingers goes on what body and what hand. I will not be in the war front. I will not have that experience. But if you haven't made it clear to yourself, which means that you already cut a path in consciousness to pull together, literally to magnetize your pathway to have the experience you envision, then everyone else who has created a labyrinth for you, you will be walking through theirs. And this is just how this works. So every place I'm going in this next 30 days, I'm asking people to please take control of their minds and focus on seeing what they want to experience in their life for them and how they see themselves going through these times. So the movies are already projecting people screaming and hollering and being pulled out of buildings and shoved into cattle cars. I mean, all of this has been projected. And so what is your reality on that? You have to make a decision for yourself, because that is actually what the universe will form for your reality. Remember, the universe rearranges itself to create your reality. So if you haven't even thought about it, then someone else who's thought about it for you has created your reality. This is critical. You don't have to be concerned about tissue re-engineering, someone stealing your genes, using your tissues as a research project, if you don't expose yourself to the institutions that do this. And so by keeping yourself healthy, and it's very simple. This was not ever to be complex. Thinking healthfully, optimistically, thinking nourishing and loving thoughts of self, obviously extending that to others, eating food that's clean and nutritious, being active and constructive in how you direct your energies will assure that you will not wind up in these institutions. Now you have to understand, you must come to grips with not wanting to face the fears that you have around doing the things that you love doing. There are millions and millions of people who go to a job every day, 8 to 10 hours, who know that that is not how they want to spend their life and energy. But you do not have the faith in self to believe that what you love doing, you can make the money that you make on the job that you have now and 1,000 times more if you can see that in your mind's eye. But the more you compromise yourself, because you have to remember that compromise is chemistry, and that manifests to the tissues as only partial function. So the more you compromise yourself, the less function you will have out of your own body, the less performance, etc. And the greatest gift and the only thing that matters in this planet, in this dimension, is your first temple, your first body. Because with this, you can resurrect anything, anytime, any place, anywhere. So it's going to be real important. I shared with individuals in Washington last night. It's not a wise move to take your money and buy a house and a car at this time. If you have monies, I would totally restore and rebuild my body. Anything I thought was wrong with it, I'd immediately get taken care of. So before I would buy a new car, I would definitely have my feet revamped, because that is the natural form of transportation. Because you have to pay attention, because when things, no, but you have to pay attention. When they shut down New York, that's all they had. So now if you don't have any feet, now where you going? You in a wheelchair, you go nowhere. You can't walk, you are going nowhere. You are totally stranded, because they're shutting down all forms of transportation, roads, everything. So here you are talking about you can't walk more than 10 blocks. Well, whatever's there for you, you will get it, because you will not be able to walk away from it. So it's real important that you take your resources and get your bodies together. Colonics, massages, adjustments, whatever you think you need, but the first thing you want to restore and reinforce is your body at this time, because the people who have the body are the ones who are going to be able to get through these times. You don't want to be dependent on anything that tomorrow you may not have access to, especially in the form of drugs and medication. So a diabetic now can get off of insulin and hypoglycemic drugs. You can easily do that. Seizure medicine, all of these things you can rid yourself of. That's what the people in Time magazine were telling you when I held it up, that you can keep the doctor away. And this is the time you want to do that. I was very surprised how 911 was handled medically. I was very disappointed, especially after the anthrax outbreaks, because it was a known fact that the antibiotics are only effective the first 48 hours after exposure. But the government told the physicians not to give out any antibiotics unless the individuals were known to be exposed. So by the time they are exposed and get to the hospital or wherever they go to the clinic and then get diagnosed, the window of 48 hours is over, and these people, if they don't have anti-serum, are dead. So in my mind, it's very obvious you don't need a degree in public health to figure this out, is that if you're interested in saving a large number of people and you only have a short margin of time or a short window, you give them the treatment before the outbreak. So therefore, the TVs could have been used to actually educate people about when and how to take the antibiotics. The people could have been told to go to their nearest clinic and pick up their dose and take it home, and when you experience the symptoms, and that can be, they run these commercials every 15 minutes. They can run a minute educational process on this, so you'll remember what the symptoms are, etc. And if that's the case, and they let you know that your area has been exposed, you can go right to your room and get your antibiotics. Because they're not going to be able to help you in the emergency rooms, because by the time people are trying to get waited on, the line is going to be dead. So you know what their response was? Well, it was so interesting. They said, well, we can't give them the antibiotics like that because they may take them and then build a resistance to them. I said, well, that's why you educate them, and you continuously run these vignettes to tell them when to take it, etc., but they have to have the medication beforehand. Well, we can't do that because, again, you know, these people don't really understand whatever else. That's how they think of you. So I said, oh, this is interesting. I said, so now we're at war. You're saying it's an epidemic. You have the stores of antibiotics, and you won't give it to the people before time, even though you know the hospital system is not going to be able to handle this. But yet and still, these are the same people that you would draft and train to fly a stealth bomber, which costs $1 billion. Now, either they have enough sense to take antibiotics when directed to, or either they don't. And if they don't have enough sense to do that, why would you want to draft them and teach them to fly a stealth bomber? Well, at that point, then we couldn't get any response. See, because either you have to have enough intelligence to do that, or either they have no business drafting you. They have no business exposing you to this high technology warfare. So I'm saying that it's very, very, in the area where I live, oh, everybody has their antibiotics. They got everything they need. They didn't care anything about what they were talking about. And I'm saying that in the inner cities, it's real important that you stay upon the information. I don't know what is the medical aspect of the spiritual Atlanta, etc., but there needs to be definitely a conduit of information through the internet websites, because the newspaper that I write, because I decided I would be a medical war correspondent, that whatever was going on, that our newsletter would basically tell you how to interpret that medically in relationship to your safety and the things that you would seriously want to consider to have available to you to negate the effects of the activities that are going on around you. So our newsletter is only email and by fax, obviously. You know, snail mail is over, and we saw that with anthrax, so you can't rely on that. I mean, the mail was held up for months. So you can decide for yourselves, but please come together and put a network together where you can push a button and get information on a dime. It's real important, the smart thing to do, a group of people to pay a surveillance staff. And that's all they do, is actually monitor all the news, UPI, etc., what's internet, FEMA, CDC, etc., and download a summary every day so that you can turn on a dime. It's very, very important for your survival. I would not rely on the newspapers at all. You've got to pay somebody or become part of a group where it rotates to be able to get the information. Because again, you were built and designed to master any experience that you can create for yourself. You have to remember this. So if you created a war for yourself, then you were also designed to be able to master that experience and survive it. But that means then that now you have to have a plan and program and the discipline to follow it. So we don't have to lose our tissues. We don't have to look at the person next door or across the street wondering when we can get their kidney or heart, etc. We can, oh, this is a serious problem. We can generate our own, but we have to be willing to learn the lesson as to how we destroyed our own initially, and be willing to rescind our ways, to rescind our thoughts, and then
get instruction on how to reestablish a relationship with self, and you can regenerate anything. So again, human corporeal reengineering is something that your body naturally does. I want you to remember the metaphor that every time you scratched yourself or traumatized yourself, it stopped bleeding on its own, it scabbed over, you formed new skin underneath, is the reminder that this happens not only on the skin but also within. But if it's not happening within, then that means that there is something that is interfering with the normal activity of your cells. What is it? Is it environmental, externally? If it is, that's also based on a state of consciousness. Okay, because, you know, when I look at people's homes feng shui wise, I mean, there's something about a person that would buy a house that they can see is getting ready to slide off on a hill. I mean, you can see the house going to slide off and they would still buy it. So it still goes back to state of consciousness. But the point is that there are environmental factors, but the environment is chosen by the consciousness. And we have to remember that. So human corporeal reengineering is something that you naturally do. Do not allow someone to sell you yourself. This is what we've demonstrated, because you will not take the time to learn and to maintain the greatest attribute that you have, your own physical body. So if you have any comments or anything, or you're interested in our newsletter, etc., you're more than glad to write me at my email address, ovary@earthlink.net, and we will respond. So I love you very, very much, and I'm so glad that you took your Sunday evening to come out. And I really hope that you will share this information with someone else. Please tell them. I hope that you'll buy the tapes and play them at least 3 times for yourself. My tape library is part of a plan to create an institution for the education scientifically and medically for the general public. And so I would really appreciate your donations by buying my tapes and not reproducing them on your own so that we can basically build this institution. Because, you know, to me it doesn't make sense that you cannot learn your anatomy and physiology without enrolling in medical school. And you have to understand that this is really how it works. You will never see a cadaver, etc., unless you're in med school. And that doesn't make sense. So we are building edifices where those who are really interested, you need to be exposed to this. You need to have a structured way of being exposed to your tissues, etc. So support us in generating this for you by buying the information but not reproducing it. Just tell people to come to the internet, or they can come to Soul Veg and get tapes, etc. But they should buy their tapes. So thank you so much, and I love you.
Give it up for the doctor, please. A little stronger for that. Gotta give it up for him. Can we really feel the energy build up? Wake yourself back up so we can do some Q&A for the sister. A little more love. Everybody needs to put their hand together. Everybody. Those who want to do questions, line up in the middle. I'll come to this microphone here.
No, we're going to put it on the stage.
Oh, you're going to put it on the stage? Okay, well, come around to your right, facing me to your right, and she will answer questions for you.
We got a restaurant block here.
What you saying to me? Okay, we're gonna ask that you limit your questions to one question. After you have asked your question, we're gonna ask that you let me talk to the people who are in the line first of all.
Brother Eora, we need to find out the price of the tapes for
Okay.
Dr. Pookrum. They're inquiring about the tapes.
Okay.
So we can get that first clarified before we start Q&A. Those who are leaving trying to get tapes.
The audio tapes are $10 and the videotapes are $30. Okay? And then the tapes of tonight's session, the audio tapes of tonight's session will be $15 as a double set, and the videotapes of tonight's session will be $40. It's also a double set. Okay? We're going to ask again, for those of you who want to ask questions, limit your question to one question, and then you will exit and walk this way and come down the aisle, okay, so we don't congest this line.
And let us ask that our questions not be run on. Let's make sure that the questions are succinct, to the point, and perhaps you ask a question for somebody else as well, so we don't duplicate the same question as well.
Hello, Dr. Pookrum. Thank you very much for such an enlightening presentation. I wanted to ask you about the role of meditation from your perspective in this healing process. You discussed intellectual understanding of functions of the body and foods.
Excuse me.
But it's one thing to intellectually know about what's going on within the body, and it's another thing to just be still and allow it to occur, allow God to heal and purify. So I wanted to hear your perspective in terms of how meditation and going within consciousness, how you can use that to align the body and heal the body.
Thank you for that question. Meditation is a form of hygiene as far as I'm concerned, and it is mandatory for anyone who is going to regenerate their tissues. So there are different types of meditations for different reasons, but at least a practice of sitting quietly for 15 minutes to 20 minutes twice a day, in the morning and in the evening, is vital for regeneration of the nerves and for the reorganization of the brain and the tissues. It's interesting, a decent computer system will have a maintenance program known as defragmentation. And the defragmentation of the hard drive is the same thing as meditation for an individual, because once you defragment it, all the files are gone through, everything is put in its proper place, etc. And literally that is the first component of what sitting quiet and focusing inward does. It brings reorganization and order to the cells and the functioning of the body, which is a form of defragmentation. So it's very important. There are just all different types. As I sit here, I'm just looking at this long list of different techniques, from TM to bija seeds to, it just goes on and on and on. And so these techniques can be employed for different reasons to stimulate different tissues, but it is mandatory, and the more mothers begin to do that and expose their children to that, we'll be able, and that's what our new society will look like, where they will just be sites where you can just go into the buildings and in a wonderful space and just sit quietly and meditate and do whatever practice you do. There's if I could just add this, since you asked the question, there's a humanoid population, I want to say this correctly. there is a humanoid race that never sleeps. They live for a minimum of 10,000 years. They never sleep, but between their activities, they do meditate. And their meditation sessions are about 30 minutes to an hour and a half long. They only eat one meal a day every 30 hours. They're strict vegetarians. And it's very interesting. They do not reproduce except once in a lifetime. And it's interesting how they describe themselves. Their children stay with their parents for 60 to 100 years of our time. And so the children have to leave the home at 100 years old. That's like, I love it. But I just bring that to your attention, that for them to be able to have that level of longevity and to never sleep, instead of losing consciousness, which is something that they don't have to do, they will go into a meditative state and be able to stay conscious for 10,000 years continuously. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Pookrum,
Yes.
when you spoke about the stem cells and the red blood cells that were I guess the building blocks, you spoke of some different foods that will help regenerate those red blood cells. What were those foods?
Well, basically, now you're asking me an extensive nutritional question. And I would say this to you. There are many foods, natural foods, all of them will form healthy blood cells if they are eaten in season, if they are chewed properly, and if your digestive tract is balanced. The key here is that most people have lost the insight on how to be able to define what is a whole natural food versus what is a food stuff, okay, which is a real big issue. So it's very clear, though, that anything that is not reproducible or that you cannot identify in nature most likely is a food stuff. It is not a natural food. Okay, and anything that is highly processed has lost its life force energy. So that's to say that if you eat it, it will fill you up, etc., but it will not produce a vital cell because the life force is not there. So if a cell is produced from that food, the life force energy to enliven it was usurped from other areas of the body. And that's one of the factors that causes aging. When a person continuously eats dead food, the energy needed to just process that is now drawn from other tissues to extract whatever nutrients are present and to get it out of the system, but no life force energy is given back. So that's why the individuals who do eat flesh, who are able to live to be centenarians, 100 years old, 110, 120 years old, they have a literal ritual on how they handle the flesh. They will not eat any flesh that isn't instantly sacrificed. It has to be bled properly, and then it is prepared and eaten. There's no such thing as refrigerating meat, because as we know, if you lose a finger or a leg or an arm, you have to bring that immediately to the hospital to have it sewn on. Within 72 hours, the life force energy is lost. And if you sever your arm or leg or finger and you keep it in the refrigerator and somebody brings it in a week later, they can't do anything with it because it is dead. And when you do the same thing with flesh, you basically are eating a substance that has no life force in it, and you're going to have to use your own to process it. Okay, so the vitality in meat is held for 72 hours, and that's it. So if you do not have the capacity to get meat that is immediately fresh or fresh for 72 hours, then yeah, then it's a problem. Okay, thank you.
Hello, my dear sister, Dr.
Oh, greetings.
Pookrum.
How have you been?
I've been wonderful, sis.
Great.
Would you please expound on what happens to little babies, mommy's babies, at that hill stick in the hospital? They're taking PKU, blood for PKU. I've counseled mommies on what happens to their babies' bloods. They've made conscious decisions not to have PKUs. I've had many mommies who've had defects called on them, or that's the Department of Family Services, the same as, I forget what it is in Detroit, but to have their babies confiscated from them for refusing to have defects. When I've told mommies just get up and walk out, they've been stopped at the door by the security. Please tell them what happens to their baby's blood and that little heel stick.
Well, in Detroit, I heard one of the news announcers state that they were now going to be putting microchips in all newborns. And so the microchips now are small enough to pass through a 22 gauge needle. And so that's the only reason why it makes sense to me that you have to have a name and a social security number before somebody leaves the hospital and they don't even know they're in the world. Because that has to go on the microchip. I mean, is there any other reason? They can't walk, they can't work. Okay, they don't know anything about a name. And so there was a gentleman at the University of Michigan who was given a $100,000 scientific grant and reward for creating the microchip that is small enough to pass through a 22 gauge needle, and that it is also not only just a conduit for information, but it also is a transmitter and receiver, the one that he created. And so therefore, once it's put into the body, they just pass a magnetic probe over the body and put it in its proper place, which is usually at the base of the brain. And then from that point, then they're able to actually know what your thoughts are. Because when you're very active, or when you're concentrating, or when you're meditating, the brainwave frequencies change from delta to theta to alpha, etc. And they can actually read that. So therefore, if they want to interrupt those thought patterns, all they have to do is transmit a frequency that will do that. So I have cautioned mothers for years to have their children at home or in a safe place where they will not be exposed to this. But again, it's very difficult to convince individuals that we are dealing with an industry that does these things. And you know, we have all kind of data, hundreds and hundreds of years, etc. But it's a fear that we still have of ourselves and our bodies. And so therefore we feel that we can't handle the experiences that we create. It's a deep-seated, implanted insecurity. And you look at TV, they tell you that you're inadequate and insecure. Because they keep telling you, if you have this, then you need me for this, and you need this for that, and whatever else, etc. So you just actually become a commodity to buy from all of these companies that offer services that you have always been able to do for yourself. So this is one of the things that that's my biggest concern. Did you have anything else in mind? Right. Yeah, right. Oh, okay. So yeah, so that they get your genetic makeup right away too. Now, something that's also very interesting, and you can follow this up, and there's other people who are lawyers and much more capable of dealing with that. But it's a known fact, though, that since the early 60s, when the gold standard behind the money in this country fell, that to handle the foreign debt that this country had created, they began to invest the citizens on the foreign securities market. And the way that you're invested in the foreign securities market is through your social security number. So most of you are earning interest for this country through your social security number, and depending upon who you are, you have a different value in securities. So an unskilled laborer or an average citizen is worth $660,000, and a trained professional is worth $1.5 million on the foreign securities market. So whether you know it or not, you are generating monies. So there's a lot of things that are going on, and you know, this is what I'm saying is that, you know, it's real important to start investing in paying people to do research and giving you the information. That is why this country will never allow Rand McNally not to exist. Never. Because they pay them intentionally to keep all the data and to do all the research and do all the surveys, so that for anything they're interested in, they can go and get the data, make the speculations, and whatever else, etc. And so a group of people who do not have stored data and information and maintain an aspect of their society to provide data for them is going to have a very hard time mastering an environment like this. You have to have access to research and data to be able to make accurate decisions. And so with all the data that's out there on you, it should be able to be collected and in an accessible database that you can have access to, so that you can make sound decisions on how you want to project your energies. So this is something for you to really think about. Yes.
Greetings. I'm a teacher in the system down here in Georgia. Of recently, we have been sending home letters about high school, middle school, and elementary students suffering from nausea and headaches. Do you know anything about that as it pertains to jets creating clouds or creating synthetic clouds? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, someone asked me about that earlier. There's a name for that. I did a presentation on it. Huh? Chemtrails. The chemtrails. Yeah, there's a problem with the chemtrails, and they've been spraying public facilities and areas through the sky for a very long period of time. You can tell the chemtrails because normally they are done in a grid. So when you actually see vapors that are in grid form, it is real important that if you possibly can, you should put on a mask that is impervious to microorganisms and most viruses. They have them now. And I would definitely pump up my system with vitamin C. I'd immediately take 4 grams of vitamin C, and I would continue that every 4 hours for the next 48 hours. Okay. But again, most people don't look up to even see this. But these types of tests have been done by this country on populations for a very long period of time. There's a book that was written by a lawyer that came out in the early 80s entitled Clouds of Disaster. And so this was a lawyer who sued the federal government because of the death of his father. At lunchtime for 2 days in a row, the federal government sprayed the city of Los Angeles with a microorganism and then asked the emergency rooms to give them the data and statistics on upper respiratory infections for the next week. And so after observing these studies, and it was sent back to the government, etc., they wrote a summary about this 2 years later. Well, the father was in the hospital and the windows of his room were opened. And so he died from a massive respiratory infection of a benign bacteria that normally is not in the hospital, what we call a nosocomial infection. So no one could tell him how his father's lungs got full of this organism. And it's a common organism to a microbiologist. It's known as Serratia marcescens. And we used to like to play with it in research because it's a bright red. So many times we use it as a tagger. Its colonies are ruby red, so you can tell it anywhere just about. So when they did the autopsy on his father's lungs, the whole inside of his lungs were bright red, full of this organism. So when he read the data, he happened to be riding the bus. And when he read the data, the report that came out in the newspaper, it's a little section about the results of how many people responded in an infectious way to this benign organism, because most people were supposed to be insensitive to it. So they were monitoring the level of immunity of the populations. And when he read this, he recognized that during the time that they said they did the sampling and sprayed the air, that was the time that his father was in the hospital and died.
So he had proof of this and everything, so they quietly settled his case. But nothing was ever done of it because they did not want people to know that they were being sprayed. So Clinton, and I talked about this, Clinton had been inundated with complaints from organizations that the medical system had been doing unauthorized research on the citizens. And so he asked Dan Marino, who was part of his cabinet at that time, to investigate these claims, and he wrote a whole book. I think it's Beyond All Doubt or something, but it's by Dan Marino. It's about 2 years old now, and that came out during Clinton's presidency, where they've documented that cancer patients were given inappropriate amounts of radiation and just all kind of things in the hospitals here. So the book is about 400 pages of all these different research studies that were done on children and that kind of thing here. So, you know, it is a problem. And again, you know, you can monitor these things if someone is able to survey the internets, etc., because there's a whole website that monitors these right, and you can pull off the pictures and everything so that you can compare them when you see them. Okay, and it's interesting because the articles that I have, they even show the mechanisms that are on jets. These are primarily done on jets. And it was interesting, there was a couple of airlines that had allowed the government to put these on their jets that were servicing the people. And when this one company investigated them, they literally kind of closed the airline because it was a small private, you know, airline, domestic. Yes.
Thank you for coming and sharing your time and all the information. My question is twofold. At the birth of my son, I asked the hospital what they were going to do with, you know, the afterbirth and the son's placenta and all of that. And they basically looked at me like I was crazy and told me that there is no way that they could give me any of my tissues or any of my son's tissues because, one, what would they put it in? Two, they claimed that it was illegal for me to walk around with blood and tissues and take it out of the hospital because it was unsanitary. But I'd asked that question years ago because I read that they use them in many products, you know, like shampoos and stuff like that.
Yeah, they
and
do.
I felt like if I wasn't going to profit from it, then I didn't want to participate in it.
Well, no, when I was a resident, it was real clear. Our department was paid $300 per placenta.
So, and at that time, they told me that there was no way that I could take ownership of my own tissues or, you know, blood or anything like that.
No, we're told, when we're taught that we're not supposed to dispense that to you. But we put them in a plastic bag. It's real simple.
Right.
I mean, that's how they go to the path lab, and then that's how the companies pick them up. But they, at that time, in the late 1970s, were selling for $300 a placenta.
So I'm sure it's much more now. So years later, my son had an outpatient surgery, and I asked for any tissues or blood or anything that came as a result of that surgery. And I had to wait the whole day until late that night because I had to make a big funk. They refused to give it to me. I ended up taking a cup like this and just taking the blood and tissues with me. And they treated me like I was insane. So I wanted to find out, how can people feel more empowered to be able to say, no, I'm going to take this tissue, I'm going to take this blood, or is there some legal way that we can take ownership of that? And also, when my son was born, as mothers have a feeling and know, I felt that he may have had some kind of implant, but there's no way for me to prove that. And if I go to a hospital and say, look, x-ray my son's ear because I think he has something in it, they're going to, you know, just get rid of me. So is there any way I can, one, prove that he has an implant, and two, get it removed?
Well, they do the same thing to animals now. You know, I will not accept an animal now from the Humane Society because all of them have chips in them. So they have a transponder, that's what they call it. It's a transponder, and all they have to do is run it across their withers, and there's a little window on the transponder, and it'll tell you what sex it is, what animal it is, when it came into the place, and what number it has, and when it got its last rabies shot. So if you had a transponder, you could actually run that over his body, and you would see it come up. It would trigger. Okay, now, as I said earlier, if you approach your caretaker, your physician, and let him or her know that you do want to have access to these tissues, or that you do not want them to go any further
than the lab, and that they should be destroyed or either what anything left be given back to you. It is for them to facilitate you. And also you should request that that be put in the chart and that the doctor sign off on it. Now, if they are not willing to sign off on it, then I would basically take it up with the administrator of the hospital, etc. That is the route that you would take. But if you did something like that, and the physician obviously would be caught off guard and whatever else, usually, and you went to the administrator, truly that would stimulate the hospital to then have to make some type protocols, because it would signal that people are waking up and wanting to have them to be responsible for that. Which means that at that point they'll either create a contract of some type that they will say that, you know, we're going to draw your blood for this reason, and now you have to sign that you understand that it's going to be this way or that way, etc. And at that point you can decide if you want them to have the tissues. Okay? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Good evening, sister. Thank you for coming into town.
Yes.
I'd like to know more about the melantropic peptides, and if there are any messages about that in movies such as The Matrix, Queen of the Damned, and Blade.
Oh, well, no question. I mean, I didn't see Queen of the Nile. Is that a movie?
Queen of the Damned. I didn't see it either, but I heard about it.
Oh, did it? Oh, I have to go see that. But I mean, yep, that was what Blade was about. I mean, they made that very clear. I mean, if you paid attention to Blade, they made it very clear that their goal as vampires were to be able to feed day and night. And they could not feed day and night because they could not tolerate the sun. And so the only way they could tolerate the sun was to basically mix their blood with someone who had also acquired the virus. Now you have to hear this. They acquired the virus that creates vampirism, but who also had melanin. That's why they had to have him as a specimen. And so the melanin in his blood plus the virus in his blood, then whoever partook of that would then be able to walk day and night. And that was made very clear. So I thought it was very interesting that they finally revealed the fact that this proclivity for flesh was due to a virus, you know, for blood was due to a virus. And it also made it very clear about what the Red Cross is doing. Okay, because I'm very clear that all this blood that they're campaigning for is definitely not for individuals having surgery and for trauma. Okay, they made it very clear that this blood was being taken and being fed to the vampires. And why do I know that? For the simple fact that many of the blood donating sites that are in the worst communities in these major cities are cloaked. In Detroit, there is a blood donor bank that sits right in the worst part of Detroit, where alcoholics, etc., are paid for their blood twice a week, and they actually have put the Methodist Church Foundation or some foolishness on the outside, so that people will not even recognize it anymore, because I talked about it so on my radio station.
Well, usually those places are like in the worst parts of downtowns of the U.S.,
exactly. And
bordering on the black neighborhood.
I talked about it so bad, and I told people to drive by and see it, because it's a real unique building. Because, you know, why is it that if this blood was going to the Red Cross, is the building big enough to put 2 other buildings in? It's totally locked down, etc. And when that truck leaves out the back, that blood that came out of somebody's arm is totally packaged and everything. It is not going to the Red Cross, because I sat there and watched it. So I'm telling you that somebody is doing something with the blood. Now you can let your imagination flow, but I'm real clear that when I saw Blade, that it was real clear that people were consuming that. There's another movie out that shows where this town literally had blood delivered like milk, like with the milkman. It came in glass bottles like the milk bottles, except it was blood. So you have to understand that there is nothing new under the sun. And you have to understand, as far as I'm concerned, that these are experiences that people create for themselves to learn more about who they are. That's why I'm saying is that heaven on earth is a state of consciousness. And when you can have that state in your mind, you will have heaven on earth, whatever that is for you. Okay, do you understand that? And there are people who have those experiences, but that's their thought patterns and that's what they magnetize to them. And so those kind of worlds have nothing to do with me. I don't have a consciousness for that. I intend not to ever create one. Okay, I find it very interesting and that they exist, but that's fine for the people who want to be in that. I don't need that. And it's very interesting, even in the movie Blade, it showed you about having a very cavalier, wandering mind. Okay, did you remember the first part of it?
Yeah.
Did you all see that? It's very interesting to watch that this man was out just to have a good time and thought he was going to pick up a woman. He had no idea what he picked up. He picked up a nightmare. That's what he picked up. You know, and I said, well, you know, he created this experience for himself because, you know, he was bored with life. He wanted something exciting and something different, but he didn't know that his life was going to be on the line. But this is what happens when we basically are not focused and centered and can appreciate the greatness in everything we do at any particular moment. We don't need that kind of perversion and deviation. Okay, and when people are not in touch with their own greatness and all the things that are going on, then that's how their mind gets drawn off into, you know, these very interesting worlds. But yeah, that's an issue. Okay, yes. So you want to ask a question? Okay. Excuse me, this brother wants to ask a question. Can he? Can you go to the... Yes.
Dr. Pookrum, I'm enjoying your lecture here today, but I need some special attention to my situation. I need a pair of new lungs and some bronchioles. Can you help me?
You need a pair of new lungs?
And some bronchioles, maybe.
And some bronchioles?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, you have the potential to make them.
Yeah, I've been listening to that, but I have to let it kind of settle in here to handle that.
But you can if you came here, that you can handle it.
All right.
If you really couldn't handle it, you couldn't have not had this experience.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And so you think about it very intensely.
Yes, I will.
And then you get in contact with me once you are 100% devoted to the fact that you really want that.
Yeah.
And then I will help you do that.
All
but
right.
I want you to really think about it because you know you're going to be a new man if you come through this.
Yes, and I think I can handle that too.
Okay, good. All right.
I thank Yahweh for his presence in you today and forever. Concerning the anthrax, since the medical de-establishment don't want to provide us with that antibiotic, is there any way that we can obtain the antibiotic other than the establishment? And are there any alternatives to the antibiotic that's specific to our blood grouping?
You can write me at my website and I'll give you that information. And also too, March, April, I think my January newsletter had not only all of the information on anthrax and smallpox, but it also had all the alternatives that were available and the foods that you should have in your kitchen if anything like that is an outbreak. I did a whole article on sea salt. Is that if you don't have any antibiotics, you don't have anything else, if you have salt, you can prevent any viral or bacterial infection just by being willing to take 1 level teaspoon of salt every 3 hours for 12 hours. There's nothing that can replicate in your blood like that. Okay, so you know that's war medicine, that's wartime medicine, but it has to be sea salt. It cannot be earth salt. So you should get in the habit of never keeping earth salt around unless it's in the bathroom for you to soak in. And I don't even recommend it for that. You should always keep sea salt around because earth salt is not physiologically sound for the body. So you should get lots of sea salt because that's going to be like money later. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you for planting a seed of higher consciousness.
Thank you.
My question is the body scan technology science. What is your opinion of it in regards to melanin dominant people?
Well, I haven't seen a lot of data on that. However, I've been looking very closely at individuals who've been receiving CAT scans and MRIs, and I'm suspecting that there is a residual of the dyes that are being held in the body if you're melanin dominant, that the half-life is not as short as it's predicted for melanin recessive or Caucasian individuals. Okay, and that's what we have to look at. Okay, so you know, I don't know what happens if you get half the dose or they need to dilute it or whatever. That's more research that needs to be investigated, and I'm sure somebody is observing that already. We just need to find out where they've been making their reports and pull the data. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Greetings.
Greetings.
I have a friend that had surgery on, she had a cyst on her right ovary, and she just had an ultrasound and found out that they found another cyst on her left ovary. So they want to try to give her birth control, but she's like 13 years old. She's very young. So do you know of any other way that, you know?
Oh, her diet is raggedy. She eats way too much dairy products, way too much sugar, because you will make a cyst on your ovary every month. I mean, the corpus luteum is literally a cyst. Okay, now how much fluid is accumulated in that little gland known as a corpus luteum is a different story. And in women who do not bathe, they only take showers, in women who eat tremendous amounts of dairy products, who eat tremendous amounts of sugar, that cyst becomes very large because they don't get in a bathtub to bring the heat to that part of the body so that that can actually be reabsorbed and moved into the circulation and removed out through the kidneys and the lymphatics.
My. What about a lot of water? Will that help if she drinks more water?
But she's got to bathe, and
Okay.
you've got to break down this mucus that she's created in her lymphatic systems throughout. So, you know, you can write me and you can
Okay.
get a consultation.
Okay.
I do electronic medicine,
Right.
and I'm excited about that. Okay. I do electronic medicine, you know. We are able to see our clients. That you can talk to me just like I'm talking to you, but
Oh,
through
that'd be great.
my computer.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I do my work by telephone, etc., and I've managed entire cases. As long as you can send me the information I need, I manage entire cases and never physically have to see the person.
All right. Thank
Because
you
when you
very
know what you're doing, you just know what you're doing.
That's right.
That's mastership.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
And I just say that humbly, but I do know. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, Dr. Pookrum.
Greetings.
I am a walking testament to a healthy diet. I came to you 2.5 years ago. Both of my fallopian tubes were blocked, one irreparably. I now have a 4-month-old little girl.
Oh, good. Well, great. Well, thank you.
because
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I'm
thank
Selena.
you.
I'm
Yeah.
Selena
Okay,
Swan.
great.
I did the microbiotic diet. And 7 months, and praise God, the Lord led me to you. And although we may not agree on everything, I just thank the Lord that we were on one accord about that.
Okay,
Because I
thank
have
you.
him here.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Did you bring pictures? Oh, hi. Oh, great. Yeah. Oh, okay. Isn't that nice? Oh, she's a cutie. Okay, great. Are these for me? Yes. Oh, good. Okay, so can you just write her name and when you had her and everything on there? Okay, great.
Hi.
And so I do want to comment on that. I have a lot of women that come to me for infertility problems, And they've been told that they have to have a lot of, I've only had one woman that we had to rebuild her. She had to have a salpingoplasty. And the only reason why she had to have a salpingoplasty, because when she had her tubes tied, that's a misnomer. They really don't tie your tubes, they cut them. And what they did is that they took her whole tube out, just about. So what little bit she had left, they had to reconstruct that. But on my program, and when her tube was reconstructed, since then she's had 4 children. So I'm saying, so when the tubes are scarred or when they're full of mucus, etc., we can easily get rid of that. It does not need all of this manipulation. But as the sister has said, it requires discipline, focus, and eating live foods prepared properly. And that's all you need. The body will do the rest, and that's a real gift. Yes.
Yes, I was told by my physician that I don't make enough red blood. And thalassemia. Okay, and he said it's nothing that I can do, but he wants to give me iron. And you just told us that.
Oh yeah, you can change that. That's a genetic issue.
Yeah.
But you can repress that and change it. You just need to know what you need to do.
Okay.
So if you want to call me for a consultation, we'll hook you up. Okay.
Got a card.
Or you can write me. Okay.
Got a card?
See it up there? Okay. No, I don't. But your friend has my number, though. Okay. Okay, right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Greetings, Dr. Pookrum.
Greetings.
It's been a
You look
wonderful,
pretty.
thank you. It's been a wonderful evening sitting at one of the feet of our masters. I tell you, this has really been a pleasure. I wanted to ask you a question. I'm an OBGYN nurse, and what I have noticed in the last few years, I don't know if it's because maybe I'm so new to the field, but it seems like it used to be we would hear about miscarriages more so in Caucasian women, and as I'm working in this field, it seems like more and more African women and women of darker color are coming now, having more and more miscarriages, and I'm hearing the doctors say, well, we just don't know what's going on, we can't tell you why, and they're going into all these surgeries and tissues are being taken from their bodies and all of this. And I was looking at the triangle of the mind that you showed us. I wanted to know, in your studies, have you seen that there are things that are interacting in our community in particular that may be causing this increase in miscarriages?
Well, there's a lot of things going on here. The statistics that I had in 1990 were indicating that the Caucasian race was going to be a minority race by the year 2050 in this country, and that the Hispanics would be number 1, the Asians would be number 2. Excuse me, no, Hispanics would be first, Caucasians, then Asians, and then the African Americans would be the smallest population. But the graph was very interesting. It was a pie graph because it showed that in 1990 the African population was 14%, and it showed that in 2050 the African population would be 12%. So instead of increasing, because all the other races were actually increasing marginally, the African race would be less than what it was. It was actually going into a zero population mode for 50 years. So when I saw that, I was quite concerned because I'm like, well, what is going to happen that is going to make that the case? So I started looking at the rate of hysterectomies, looking at the rate of the types of birth control that were used. The Norplant is a 5-year program, that kind of thing. But as I started traveling, there is a problem in many parts of the world. For example, in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, they have a very, very high infertility rate. They can't even get pregnant because of sexually transmitted diseases. Chlamydia trachomonas, okay, and it is actually causing havoc in the tubes of these women. So I don't know if there's an organism, chlamydia, that is responsible here for all of the spontaneous abortions, etc. I know that the diet here is very poor. The fast foods are definitely very dangerous. Where I live in Washington State, it is amazing to really watch those chicken farms. You know, they're hot houses for chickens.
Okay.
And it's so mystical just about, because they will only deliver the chickens at night. They come and pick the chickens up at night. And they just have, you know, acres where they have these houses that they have 2,000 or 3,000 chickens in each house. And one farm may have maybe 10 to 12 houses. And it smells so bad that when the wind blows, it's just disgusting, because it's chicken poop and urine. And it's so interesting because I never recognized how caustic and how acidic chickens are. But the farmers will tell you that they sell chicken manure, but you can't use chicken manure for almost 2 years. That once you buy it, you have to let it set, because it is so acid, it will kill whatever it lands on instantly. So I'm saying that if people are eating these fried chickens, you know, from all these fast food places, it's a known fact that they are genetically engineering chickens, where they don't grow beaks anymore, where they basically don't fly because they don't need to. So they don't have to debeak them. They used to have to chop their little beaks off and things like that, so they don't do that anymore. And I don't know what they call them, because they really say that, you know, the agricultural department doesn't allow them to really call them chickens, but they are sold as such. So I say that it probably is also the food that's being eaten. I'm very leery of the candies that are present. You know, it's very interesting that you want to sell me twice as much candy for less money. No, why? Oh, I mean, there's a problem with that. Now, see, it goes back to my medical school training, because in my medical school, one of the deans of the department was a known osteologist. He was a specialist in bone metabolism. And I remember going into the lab, and he had all these little bones in these petri dishes, and they had different concentrations of sugar. And it was amazing, because I never thought that you could take a piece of bone and actually turn it into rubber, where the bone just is completely rubber. It's nothing but matrix left, because all of the minerals are drawn out by sugar. So it's a known fact that Africans have 10 times the bone mass than Caucasians. Africans of all the races have the densest bone, have the greatest bone density. And as it is slated in the research, and Stanley Garn from the University of Michigan wrote an article on this, is that by the time an African is diagnosed to have osteoporotic disease, the bone has been almost irreparably damaged, because the standard of the Caucasian is not appropriate for measuring the density of African bone, because it's 10 times greater. But what de-densifies bone of any type very rapidly is sugar. So when I see all this sugar around in our communities, and you're selling me twice as much for less money, you know, I just know that that is just not in my best interest. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Greetings, Dr. Pookrum.
Greetings, how are you?
I'm fine. I have a question about fevers. I've been collecting information about fevers, and especially in young children, like probably between the ages of 2 and 5. And I wanted to know, what is the, I've heard a lot of stories, what is the highest that a child that young could tolerate, like the highest degree, and what would be the best way to remedy it? Quickest, effective, most safe way to get rid of a fever, say over like 103.
Okay, well, first of all, you want to understand that a fever in itself is not pathologic. You want to have a fever.
Right.
Okay, because heat stimulates activity of the immune system. That's why the body will crank up the temperature, because if it has been invaded with a virus or a bacteria, then the first thing they want to do is send the soldiers out. And the soldiers are the white blood cells. And the white blood cells flood into the circulation when the temperature goes up, because they're stored normally in the lymph nodes. So if you think of your lymph nodes as little forts, like Fort Lewis and, you know, Fort, all these, those are little forts.
also in the gut and in the spleen, okay, and in areas where there's a lot of lymph nodes, or lymphoid tissue. So the temperature goes up, they immediately know to come out and check out things to see what's happening. So it's not a problem as long as it doesn't go too high. We find that in children of that age, they cannot tolerate temperatures above 103.5 to 104 degrees because it immediately throws the brain into a seizure formation, usually due to two reasons. Inappropriate dehydration, okay, one, and a very dirty colon, okay, because as above, so below. And so the fastest way to lower any temperature is to give the individual an enema, okay? Putting anything on the skin that causes the heat to evaporate very fast, such as alcohol, etc., which is why you can wipe a person down in alcohol, or vinegar and water also dissipates it. But if you give enemas, that lowers the body temperature right away. Keeping the child hydrated also stabilizes the nervous system, as we've seen, and giving the enema not only drops the body temperature or the core temperature, but it also gets rid of any waste and putrefaction that the bacteria could use as food to rapidly grow upon. Okay, because the toxins from the bacteria also can be irritating to the nervous system and also cause seizure activity. So hygiene will normally always assist in maintaining a healthy temperature or febrile state so that the white blood cells can do what they need to do. Then the temperature will go down, the child will be fine. Okay, and it's amazing how that is so resisted in the hospital setting. And I'm like, you know, we have space stations in outer space, and we act like we've never heard of an enema in the hospital.
Right.
So I just saw a patient recently in the hospital, and you know, when I examined her lower abdomen, I could feel her whole colon because it was full of stool. And I'm like, you're not going to ever get off this pain medication if you don't get all these toxins out of you. And so they wanted to give her a hard time about asking for an enema every day. And I'm like, well, you know, the litmus test is obvious. She gets an enema every day until you can't feel the stool. And then we can decide that they should be at any other rate. But as long as you feel stool like that in a person, oh, they have to be cleaned out on a continuous basis. And most mothers are not checking the bowel and urinary habits of their children. Okay, so I think that is very important that if they're fed on a regular basis, then you know usually when they go to the toilet. And then as far as I'm concerned, it may sound strange, but because I really could not tolerate illness in my home, I checked my children's stool when they were young. Okay, I know you're laughing. My daughter's over here. They're like, Ma, why are you doing this? No. But I did. I mean, because I knew that I could not take care of illness all day and then come home and take care of it at night. So, I mean, I just could not have that in my house because I would have been a child abuser. No, I know.
Right.
Okay, yeah, right. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Greetings, Dr. Pookrum.
Greetings.
I have a question for you. In the next month, I'll be going overseas, and I want to know what are my other options besides going to the hospital and getting vaccinations to go overseas? Is there something else that I can do to prepare myself besides taking a vaccination?
Well, it depends on where you're going.
China.
Well, China's not too bad, except they do have those, they can have outbreaks of cholera. That's a problem they can have there. Well, I do know that there are some sites on the internet that do talk about vaccinations, and they also talk about the legalities of this. They also do have procedures that you can use legally to be able to get around that. So the key here is that you need to get that information and find out if you have enough time to basically follow those directives. Okay. Eating very clean and not eating a lot, and making sure that you take basic appropriate herbs when you travel is real important. So I mean, I don't eat a lot when I travel because of that reason, because I'm not going there to eat. I'm going there for other reasons.
So if you contact us, if you want a travel consultation, we'll do a travel consultation and set you up so you'll have everything you need. So the people that get a travel consultation with me, they never get sick. They never get Montezuma's revenge because we tell them what to take and what to look for, okay?
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings, sister.
Greetings, how are you?
Thank you for the knowledge you brought us this evening. Thank you for this knowledge you brought us this evening, and I would like to add to the audience that there's a very good book out that you can read that deals with a lot of these questions and answers, even some of the ones you didn't answer, and by a guy named David Icke. Don't get
yes, he's got a great website.
Don't be against him because he's European, because he is telling the truth.
Yeah.
And he tells all about the chemtrails, all about a lot of the things that we're talking about. He tells about the Red Cross not being a health agency. They are an intelligence agency, and they are collection. They collect blood for the Illuminati to drink. They drink this blood. They don't give it to people.
Now he said that.
They drink this blood. The blood that you give to the Red Cross.
I didn't say that.
Now they got a blood drive is on at Morehouse in our community right here to get you to come and give blood. But what they gonna do with that blood? They're gonna give it to Bush and Gore and the
I didn't
Queen
say that.
and all these people, and they drink it.
I didn't say
so
that.
So they can control our minds.
I didn't say that.
Check it out.
But you should go to David Icke's website. It's very interesting. Yeah. ICKE. And so, yeah, he has a lot of interesting information for you.
I thank you very much
You're
for
welcome.
sharing all the information that you've given to us tonight. And I am currently seeing a gynecologist. I wish you could be my gynecologist. I've had fibroids for about maybe over 25 years since I was about a teenager. And they really haven't bothered me too much. But I want to know how you can eliminate them or shrink them. And after, when you get a certain age, aren't they supposed to just kind of shrink and go away by themselves? Can you give me a little bit more information about that if you can?
Because they're not stimulated by as much estrogen, etc., they do go down in size.
Okay.
But yeah, we have a whole program for uterine fibroids. I'm very concerned about women with uterine fibroids. The emotional state is what I'm concerned about. They do compromise your finances, they compromise your relationship, they compromise your quality of life. So just on the uterus, as far as I'm concerned, is the least effect that they have because of how they're generated, the thoughts that generate them. So I would definitely like for you to have a consultation with me.
Okay. Now, do you have a 1-800 number that I can contact you with?
No.
Okay. Just the website right there?
Uh-huh. Or you
okay.
can call our, right.
Okay.
Or you can call our office directly, 360-894-6257. 360-894-6257.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. This is a serious problem, you know, and this is part of the whole healing of women on this planet. So it's interesting that females of different races have different issues, but all of it is an indication of rejection of accepting the feminine gender and embracing all that it offers. So whether it's ovarian disease, which is very common in Caucasians, or uterine disease, fibroids in African women, or endometrial issues, which is very common in Asians, etc., it's still a representation that there are psychological impasses that have been acculturated in the lifestyle of these women all over the world that interferes with them being able to handle this wonderful temple known as the female body. This is a real serious issue because this is the gateway to this dimension. Nothing gets here unless it comes to this gateway. So if the consciousness of this gateway is impaired or has issues around accepting its full capacity, then everything that comes through it also comes with that bind and with that limitation. So, I mean, we have to transform that. This is a world problem we're dealing with. Okay, thank you.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom.
She kind of addressed it, one of the questions I was coming to ask you, because I also work one of my specialties as a medical surgical nurse.
Oh.
And a lot of Black American females come through and have hysterectomies, and I was really concerned about that. And when I saw your flyer that you dealt with the fibroid issue, because that's why they're having this, I was like, I need to get to talk to you, because I'm really concerned about that. You know?
Yeah, well, I am too. I've been dealing with that war since 1975.
Right.
And, you know, we've created a home treatment plan because I recognize, and I prayed to God, I said, you know, there are 15 million women in this country with uterine fibroids alone. I don't want to see 15 million women. So how are they going to get help? And so when God showed me how this can be done in a systematic way that they can actually follow this at home, etc., and get the results, I wrote this. And I was really in trepidation when I did this. I said, can you imagine? The American College of Surgeons is really going to flip when they recognize that somebody sat down here and written a home treatment plan for a surgical disorder.
Right.
But my God said, do not think about that. I will take care of them. You must do this. So those women who are willing to follow this, because it deals directly also with the state of consciousness. It comes with audio tapes. It comes with a whole manual. They have to journal, etc., and they have to follow up with me. And when they do that, they see results. And we have documented results from ultrasounds as to how this diminishes. So we handle the bleeding, we can handle the swelling, we can handle the hydronephrosis, we can handle all of that.
But what's causing them?
The state of consciousness. I have concluded, and I just gave a lecture on this, that uterine fibroids is a long-term physical manifestation of untreated post-traumatic shock syndrome. Because every group of women that I have seen that have this disease primarily have undergone intense colonialization or have come through a slavery process that they were never treated for. And you have to understand that during those processes, when you read and recognize what happened, the confrontation and the intimidation around relationships, around children, all of these things are directly related to the uterus, especially here in America, where an African woman in slavery could not at all make a bond with her family because her husband may be taken off any time, the children sold, etc. She may have to sleep with who knows who. That is very, very traumatic, and it is no different really than post-traumatic rape syndrome. And as many women as I've worked up with this, we have the same issues. And it has never been treated, and the anxiety and the fear and the insecurity comes out in the tissues. The women that I have sat with, when you talk to them psychologically, the profile of a woman with uterine fibroids, that they have ambivalences about having children, they have ambivalences about being able to have intimate relationships because of broken relationships previously that were very painful, that they've never resolved. Many of them are incest victims or rape victims on top of that. And almost 95% of women with uterine fibroids have had one or more voluntary interruptions of pregnancy. And that was done because of socialized reasons or financial reasons, etc. It's all a replay of the whole thing. And I think that it's very well dramatized in The Color Purple. I think that it was exquisitely shown, post-traumatic slavery syndrome in Beloved. And that is why that movie could never be appreciated by Caucasians, because they have never been enslaved like that. And so it's very complex for them to understand, because if you are not suffering or have not come through a post-traumatic shock syndrome, then to watch Oprah play that seems to be very schizophrenic to you. But you know, if somebody's whipped you on your back, where you have a choke tree on your back, that somebody's snatched your children out of your arm, and you just decided that they are not, I mean, you know, this lady decapitated her children because she got very clear that she was not going to see them go to another home and be perhaps raped or mistreated either. So to decapitate your own children, to bring an end to a circumstance like that, is very traumatic. and it shows a woman who is trying to cope with a solution that she chose to a bigger problem. And so I commend her for taking that on, and I recognize that it was a personal project for her, because she was very clear that most people who saw that, even the black people who saw that, could not identify it because it's very painful to go through the treatment of post-traumatic syndrome. So you can take anybody from Vietnam or Desert Storm that had post-traumatic syndrome, and they will tell you that it was not comfortable having to deal with that. So I'm telling you this, I finally concluded this, because this is why this disease can only be, quote, treated, unquote, by hysterectomy, but then that takes her into a whole nother way of life that she was never created to experience. But this is what the American College of Gynecology says, that the only cure for uterine fibroids is hysterectomy, because they reoccur under every other treatment offered, because no one has approached changing the anxiety state that attacks uterine tissue. And I really see the exact same correlation in ovarian disease, because women who have constantly been oppressed and have constantly been told that they're a commodity and that they have to look cute all the time to be taken care of, etc., they truly have confusion about their creative capacity, which is why so many Caucasian women in this country have ovarian problems. They don't see themselves as their primary caretaker. It is the husband that they're able to acquire under all conditions that they tolerate to be able to be taken care of. And it's just recently, in the last 20 years, that they have finally recognized that they do not have to tolerate living conditions and circumstances or be literally treated like a prostitute to be able to have a decent living. So I said it earlier, and I will say it again, that this war of terrorism is a reflection of how each and every one of us terrorize ourselves with our inability to recognize who we are and the low self-esteem that we perpetuate in our minds. And I'm saying that women especially are the reflection of this, because we're the gateway and we set the paradigm for the personality, because every thought that we think crosses the placenta. So I'm saying that those women in the East that have to wear black, they can't talk, they can't be in public places, etc., are reflections of how we feel about ourselves as taking full control over our lives as the gateway. And you hear me clearly, I am not talking about being a man. I am not talking about basically trying to do anything that men are created to do. I'm saying that being the gateway to this dimension means that if I'm enlightened, whatever comes through me is enlightened. If I'm happy, whatever comes through me is happy. Understand that anything that can create this level of order would not give me the capacity to create another life and not be able to provide me with everything I need to take care of it. So I don't have to create in a fear of lack. And so many women are continuously focusing on what they don't have, and they truly don't have it because they have never taken the time to know themselves. And this is why the Pope is apologizing every time he can open his mouth. He's continuously falling apart because of the lie that he sits upon. The Barberini Library has more information about the physiology, the metabolism, and the capabilities of the creative principle known as a woman than any other library on this planet. But they confiscated it to intentionally control the gateway for their own manipulation. So he can apologize all he wants to, but until he flings open the doors of that library that's in the basement of the Vatican and gives up that information, he will continue to suffer. And there's no silk clothes, there's not enough people to rub him, there's not enough medicine that's going to alleviate his suffering. So I'm telling you that there's nothing new here, and all of this information is known. And I'm saying that when a woman doesn't even know, like I did a presentation, most women don't even know that they're only fertile 1 day out of the month. I have one question. The egg only lives 1 day out of the month. If you knew that, there would be no way that you could let somebody tell you that you have to take a poison every day for birth control. You have to take a poison 28 days to prevent pregnancy one day. But this is the same woman that can go to a university and read 10,000, 100,000 pages and graduate. I mean, that's an insult to your intelligence.
Right.
This is the same woman that can be the right hand to the president, but she doesn't even have the capacity to control 1 day of fertility once a month. No. And I'm saying that these kind of contradictions we're at war with this now. It's not about terrorism out there, it's about internal terrorism and the ignorance that we are perpetuating so that we do not take full control of who we've been created to be.
Right. I have one more question.
Sure.
A sister would like to know, how does abortion affect your ability to have children, and what do they do to your uterus?
Well, so I will answer that. There's many ways you can answer that, and I've decided that I will not answer that medically. I will answer that psychologically. Okay? The process of having the abortion physically is not the issue, because the deed is done when she thinks and concludes that this is what she must do. So in your mind, if you decide that you have to have an abortion, then you have also sent the information out to the cosmos that you do not want to reproduce at this point any longer. Now, you have to understand that the intensity of that can lock a woman out of her capacity to have children for the rest of her life, and I've seen this, because they are stuck there at that decision. So it's a known fact, and there's a science in gynecology known as antenatal medicine, where they have taken women and they have studied them who have had incest experiences, rape, abortions, and have watched them and the children after they have become pregnant and have noticed pathological behavior in the children because she was never treated for the pathology that occurred to her prior to pregnancy. Because whatever has occurred in her body, I tell you, crosses the placenta. And if she is carrying anxiety about these things, then that automatically is transmitted to the child, and the normal path of growth and development has deviated. So that is why it is very, very important that one has to make peace with oneself and recognize that where they are today does not have to be where they are tomorrow, but to learn the lesson and to face self as to why we make these decisions and why we have made these decisions, and to fulfill the deficit in ourselves that we saw at that moment, then allows us and frees us to be the complete person tomorrow that we had always been created to be in the past. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so very
You're
much.
welcome.
Can we give some love to Sister Sanut Arit, also known as Dr. Jewel Pookrum. A little more. A little more. Is everybody clapping? Let me see. Let me scan. You're not clapping. I want to thank her for coming out. I also want to remind you that it is past her bedtime. So we're going to release her, but we also have available before you leave the videotape for a sum of $40, the double cassette tape for a sum of $15. Tonight's lecture, also when she hinted on or spoke briefly about the Pope, if you get the tape, the Health and Light tape, a lot of information that she hinted at is loaded in that tape. It's called Health and Light. That is available at the table tonight. Also, New Dimensions in Healing. A little biographical, talking about